This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 5 minutes past 7. Welcome to the programme. It's Iain Dale with you until 10. Now, back in 2020, in fact, before the US election in 2020, Joe Biden said, and this is a direct quote, "Character is on the ballot." Well, it certainly was, wasn't it? Now, today, he's done what he and his aides repeatedly said he would not do, and he's pardoned his son Hunter for tax and gun crimes. These are fairly serious crimes, aren't they? Now, it's, I guess, one of the last significant acts in office that Joe Biden will undertake, and he used the extraordinary powers of the presidency to grant a full and unconditional pardon to his surviving son on criminal cases in California and Delaware, sparing him from a potential jail term. Now, I think most people in America and most people in this country will find this unacceptable. It is a complete backtracking on what he said he would do before. It's not unusual for presidents to issue pardons, and to be fair to Joe Biden, he hasn't issued many over his term. And if you look down the list of presidents, going back to 1945 with President Truman, going through Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, it was President Truman who issued the most. He issued around, 2,000, can you believe? President Biden has only issued a few dozen. Donald Trump actually didn't issue that many when he was president. But doesn't this decision effectively give Donald Trump almost carte blanche to do what he wants? Because he's now saying, well, if Joe Biden can do this, then I could pardon all of the people who are in prison because of the 6th of January insurrection. And you have to say, well, on the logic, he's got a point on that. I mean, we don't have a system of pardons in this country, and I'm glad we don't, because politicians can't get themselves into this position. But how can it be right for a president to pardon his own son? Doesn't that effectively shatter any remaining trust in the political system in the United States? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. Well, let's talk to Toulouse Olorunapinna, who is the White House bureau chief of the Washington Post. Toulouse, thank you very much indeed for joining us. This seems, on this side of the Atlantic, to be the most extraordinary move by President Biden. Was anybody expecting him to do this?
Well, despite the fact that President Biden had said that he would not do this, and his aides had said over and over again categorically that they would not issue this pardon, it was in some ways expected that he would reverse course and ultimately do this when push came to shove and his son was facing the prospect of going to jail. He has, as a father and as president, unique power to prevent his own child from going to jail. And even though he said that he wouldn't do this and that he respected the system of justice, he respected the important separation of powers and the independence of the American judicial system, ultimately, he decided to do this, and it was expected in some ways because this pardon power has been used in the past. We've seen past presidents, in some cases, use the pardon to protect their own family members. And even though it's frowned upon in our system of justice, it is something that is common for presidents who have family members and close associates who are in legal jeopardy to use that power that they have uniquely as president to spare their loved ones from being prosecuted or from being put into jail. And so even though it was expected, it doesn't mean that it's not something that is highly controversial. It doesn't mean that President Biden is not getting a lot of criticism, even from Democrats and Republicans alike, for this decision. But it was something that people were in some ways expecting, that as soon as it became real that his son might go to jail, that he'd reverse course, and all of his previous statements saying that he wouldn't do this would go out the window, and that ultimately he'd make a different decision.
And when was the sentencing going to be for Hunter Biden?
We were less than 2 weeks away. December 12th was a date when he was to face a judge, and we were going to be getting sentencing memos from prosecutors laying out the crimes, laying out the number of years that they wanted him to spend behind bars. And so Joe Biden was able to preempt that by putting out this pardon, a full unconditional pardon for any crimes that Hunter Biden may have committed between 2014 and 2024, a pretty blanket pardon that would make it very difficult for any prosecutor to bring forth any case for any of the acts that took place over that decade plus. And so that's part of the reason Joe Biden made this decision and put it out now, as opposed to later in the term, when you often see presidents putting out pardons in the final week of their term in mid-January. But because the sentencing was about to happen in December 12th, Joe Biden decided to put out this memo and let not only the prosecutors, but also the judge know that he would not be allowing his son to go to prison.
And how serious were the crimes that Hunter Biden committed?
Now, that is a matter of some debate here. Now, these were serious crimes dealing with guns and taxes. The seriousness of the crimes are a matter of debate, in part because we saw this in Joe Biden's pardoning memo. He said that no other person would have been actually prosecuted for these crimes. They would have been handled in a different way. Hunter Biden didn't hurt anyone physically with the gun that he purchased. He was suffering from addiction at the time. At the same time, he was not paying his taxes, and he later paid the taxes back. And so the seriousness of the crimes, in some cases, in the minds of some outside experts, is not quite as serious as it's being made out to be by Joe Biden's political enemies, because, Hunter Biden had a gun for about a week and a half. He didn't use the gun. He filled out a form saying that he wasn't on drugs when he was on drugs. It's not a crime that's typically prosecuted, especially for people who are addicts. There was a plea deal at some moment that would have allowed Hunter Biden to plead away some of these charges and not have a felony record. That fell apart last year. But at the same time, these are serious crimes that when you have to focus on things like guns, drugs, taxes, not paying taxes, to the tune of hundreds of thousands, or in some cases even millions of dollars. He was facing serious time because he was convicted. The bigger question was whether or not he should have been charged in the first place, whether or not he should have faced some sort of civil penalty as opposed to a criminal penalty for things like not paying your taxes. But at the end of the day, he was convicted, he pled guilty, and he was facing serious time. That's part of the reason Joe Biden decided that he was not going to let his son be in prison for these acts, even though it was clear that he committed these things. He was clear that he committed these crimes. Joe Biden used his presidential authority to shield him from the repercussions of these crimes and make it so that his record is clean. He's no longer a felon. He is pardoned for these various crimes. That's a very unique power. It belongs to only one person in the entire country. And Hunter Biden was fortunate that that power belonged to his father.
And I guess we should also point out that Donald Trump pardoned his son-in-law's father, Charles Kushner, who's just been appointed as ambassador to France. I mean, what a coincidence. Tolo, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Tolo Olorunipa there, who is White House bureau chief of the Washington Post. Spencer Critchley is a Democratic strategist who worked on both of the Obama-Biden presidential campaigns and author of the book Patriots of Two Nations, Why Trump Was Inevitable and What Happens Next. Spencer, a very good evening. Now, you work for Joe Biden. Are you rather disappointed in Mr. Biden tonight?
Yes, I'd have to say the short answer is yes. I certainly understand why he would be moved to do this. I think it's a situation where if you look at it apart from him being president of the United States, you can agree with his position that if his son Hunter's last name weren't Biden, he wouldn't have faced this kind of punishment in all likelihood. That doesn't mean that the investigation was corrupt or improper, though. It just means that you can legitimately disagree with the severity of what's happened to Hunter. The trouble is, President Biden is the president, and the insistence on the sanctity of the rule of law is absolutely central to his defense of democracy and to anyone's defense of democracy. And I think this would have been a case in which you could look at the situation of your son and say, this is really not fair to my son, and I don't want him to suffer unfairly, but recognize you're the president, and often in public office, you have to not only do what's right, but be seen to do what's right. At least this is what we hope people would do and what we're so alarmed about with Donald Trump. So as I say, I understand the decision as a father and even, on the technicalities, but as president, I disagree with it.
In 2020, he said character is on the ballot in that presidential race. Well, I mean, people will see this as just brazen hypocrisy. He promised that he wouldn't issue a pardon. He's now done that. Doesn't that give Donald Trump license to do whatever he likes in terms of pardons? Now, he did issue, I think, over 140 pardons but during his presidency, or most of them, I think, right at the end. Joe Biden may well issue a load more on his last day in office. That is the traditional thing that presidents do. But it doesn't half leave a sour taste in the mouth particularly with people whose trust in politicians and politics is already at rock bottom.
Yes, I would say it's important to distinguish license versus appearance of license. So I would say it absolutely does not give Trump license to do things like pardon relatives or pardon the January 6th insurrectionists in cases where those people are clearly guilty and committed serious crimes. But the trouble is, in the public's mind now, we're parsing legalities versus the way those legalities work. And as I say, you have to be seen to be doing the right thing, not just actually be doing the right thing. And that's the risk here. And of course, Trump is already exploiting it. Trump is by far the most corrupt person ever to get near the office of the presidency. And there is no defense for just the longest imaginable list of things he's done, including trying to overthrow our government. The trouble is, though, that this does, give him the appearance of license to do this sort of thing. And this is a critical time in America's history when public faith in democracy and in institutions in general is very low. And if we're going to preserve our democracy, especially during the next 4 years with really there's no other way around it. He's a corrupt autocrat resuming the presidency and doing his best to dismantle democracy. Those of us who still believe in democracy and the rule of law as a crucial part of it, must be seen to be standing for it.
And nepotism is a corrupt practice, isn't it? And that's what we've got here.
Oh, my gosh. And, and again, one could say, well, look at Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. And, Jared Kushner's $2 billion in funds invested in his, apparently close to inactive investment fund by the Saudi government and all the other ways the Trump family has profited from their connections with the White House. But, that takes us into the realm of what's known over here as whataboutism. I don't know if you use that phrase.
Yeah, we say what aboutery.
Whataboutery.
Yeah.
But so what happens if you engage in whataboutery is you're defining morality down to the lowest possible level. You're looking at the worst possible behavior by your opponent and saying, I demand the right to be at least that bad. And surely that can't be the moral system we're running on.
Is there any pressure for the system, the pardon system, to be completely abolished, to take politicians out of the equation?
I think it would be good. I mean, there is, again, in a more honestly run administration, there is a system. It's not just usually the president unilaterally determining that this person will be pardoned. It goes through a disciplined process, through lawyers, through the Justice Department reviewing pardon proposals. Unfortunately, that's clearly not what happened in this case. This is Joe Biden deciding personally to do it, which is exactly what we would all normally criticize Donald Trump for doing. So I think there is an argument. Well, why don't we just do away with it? A president is not a king, at least so far. We'll see how the next 4 years go. And we don't want to give a president, again, so far, king-like powers. So why would a president have a monarchical power to pardon people?
Spencer, thank you for joining us. That's Spencer Critchley there, a Democratic strategist. His book is called Patriots of Two Nations, or is it Patriots? Why Trump Was Inevitable and What Happens Next. want to get your reaction to this blatant example of nepotism. And we don't have pardons of this nature in this country. I'm glad we don't, because I don't think it's a good idea for politicians to have these powers. But presidents down the decades have used them to one extent or another. It does seem, and I'm not making a partisan point here, well, I suppose I am in a sense, but it is factual, that Democratic presidents seem to, by and large, offer more pardons or grant more pardons than Republican presidents. I've got the graph here that shows all of the pardons that have been given, that have been granted since 1945. It doesn't make happy reading. And President Obama, 1,700 commutations of sentences. They weren't pardons, they were commutations. But even he gave more pardons than George W. Bush and indeed Donald Trump. What do you make of all of this? Is it something that you think will give Donald Trump license to basically do what he wants, or maybe he'd have done it anyway? Does it make your trust in the political system? OK, it's in another country, but it all seeps back here, doesn't it? Does it make your trust in politics just diminish that a little bit further? 0345 6060 973.
Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
Let's go to Joe in Elstree. Hello, Joe.
Oh, hi there. Hi. I just wanted to make the point that I think most people actually haven't even. Well, I've not heard anyone make the point just yet. Is that when you are let off, as Hunter Biden has been, he's now not able to plead the Fifth Amendment. So when Trump goes after his enemies that have wronged him, as he sees it in the next administration, and Hunter Biden is called as a witness, Hunter Biden will not be allowed to plead the Fifth. Therefore, potentially, he'll be incriminating his own father, which, unfortunately, Joe Biden has missed a trick here, probably because of his cognitive breakdown. He hasn't thought ahead as to what's going to happen. And Hunter Biden will be called as a witness because of Hunter Biden's laptop.
Well, I was going to mention that because that seems to have been completely forgotten, because it was seen when all this I'm trying to remember the details of the scandal, but everyone was saying, oh, this is just the Republicans causing mischief. But actually it wasn't. It was a genuine scandal, wasn't it? So if he's called to give evidence on that, you may be right. He might be in deep trouble.
Well, I will be proven right, Ian. And the let off of Hunter Biden goes all the way back to January 2014. When Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma, I believe, of the gas company, where Hunter Biden was receiving an awful lot of money for seemingly just being a crackhead. So obviously he's the bagman for Mr. 10%, and we know who Mr. 10% was because it was in Hunter Biden's emails on his laptop. So unfortunately, Joe Biden has done an almighty fatal blow to himself and his legacy. Yeah, and Trump is going to go after him like a rabid mad dog. And unfortunately, Biden is toast. Biden is absolute toast. And I've got to say, that Democratic stooge that you just had on, somehow trying to equate Trump to Biden, I don't remember Trump's children being charged with a federal crime. Hunter Biden was charged with a federal crime. So it's a completely false equivalent when he somehow predicted
up to a point.
Trump. Well, it is a false equivalent, Ian. Well, children were not charged with a crime. Well, he's a Democratic stooge, so I expect nothing less.
Well, to be fair to him, he did say that he disapproved of this pardon. But don't forget, as I said before, that Donald Trump did grant a pardon to Jared Kushner's father. So, I mean, that's a fairly close familial relationship as well.
It's not his child.
No, of course it isn't. I completely accept that, but the principle is the same.
So I don't know why we're trying to somehow psychic. So suddenly, everyone's a psychic, and everyone can predict what Donald Trump is going to do and pardon all his children. It's nonsense.
I'm not suggesting. I haven't suggested that, but you seem to be quite powerful at predictions with what you think Donald Trump is going to do about Hunter Biden's laptop. You were making a prediction there.
Absolutely, because for 4 years, Trump has been calling it at his rallies the laptop from hell. And when you go online and you look at the laptop from hell, it is hellish. It is drugs, and it's far worse, and it's corruption, and it's Mr. 10%. And we all know who Mr. 10% is. He's Joe Biden's bagman. That's what he was. because he was an overindulged crackhead, and Biden thought, I can use my son to enrich my family. And that's what's going to come out over the next 4 years.
Well,
and as a Republican, you should
would obviously deny
and
that.
lap it up. Well, of course he'll deny it, but when he's called to trial, Hunter Biden is going to screw his own family because he was screwed by his own father. And I'm going to sit back and I'm going to lap it up.
I can tell. Joe, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's take a bit of a deeper dive into this system of presidential pardons with Professor Kim Whaley, who's Professor of Law at the University of Baltimore, also an attorney and the author of everyone's an author of a new book at the moment, Pardon Power, How the Pardon System Works and Why. Kim, thank you for joining us on the programme. I imagine you've been rather busy today.
Yes, nonstop. And it goes on for several hours. Everybody wants to have this conversation.
Now, where does the presidential pardon emanate from? Has it always been there, going back to the days of George Washington?
Yes, it's in Article 2 of this Constitution, which is the part that gives the president his job description. And it says that he shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States with the exception of impeachment, except in the cases of impeachment. That's the only express ban on pardons that's in the Constitution itself.
And has it been a matter of controversy over the years? I mean, look, normally we only ever hear about presidential pardons when they make them on the last day in office. And they don't tend to happen sort of during the term of office, I don't think, but you correct me if I'm wrong. But how much controversy have they caused over the years?
Well, they do happen during office. Donald Trump in his last term pardoned Texas Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who had been held in contempt of court for racial profiling of immigrants illegally. Jimmy Carter pardoned draft dodgers at the Vietnam War. That was controversial. President Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, very controversial. Bill Clinton pardoned a guy by the name of Mark Rich, who was a financier who fled to Switzerland and had, interests close to the Clintons. And Congress investigated that pardon to see if it was a pay-to-play pardon. And the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York investigated that, and Bill Clinton later in an opinion editorial said he regretted that pardon because it came back politically against him. But I think, the pardons reached a new low, frankly, with the last president of the United States, Donald Trump, with the flurry of pardons relating to the Mueller investigation. Federal judge on the record stated, that with respect to Roger Stone in particular, it looked like the pardons were around, some of the activity Donald Trump engaged in was to silence people from being able to testify against him. So they've increasingly become, I think, used over the years in controversial ways, potentially corrupt ways. But the United States Supreme Court just this last summer anointed presidents with criminal immunity and singled out the pardon as one of those powers that presidents can use even to commit crimes with impunity. So the pardon, what Joe Biden's pardon is, I think, perfectly constitutional.
It may be constitutional, but when you look at the number of pardons that other presidents have issued, I mean, Donald Trump, I think it was 143. Barack Obama was around the 200 mark. His pardons didn't seem to be so controversial. Why would that be?
Yeah, Barack Obama is one of those that did not issue any pardons that seemed to smack of nepotism or corruption or self-interest or pay-to-play quid pro quo, pardoning people that are high-ranking officials or wealthy donors, things like that, where there's personal enrichment related to the pardon. So, it's one of those powers that the red light, the brakes on corrupt pardons is really someone's own integrity, less so, stopgaps in the actual United States Constitution.
Should we read anything into the fact that Democratic presidents seem to issue far more pardons than Republican ones overall? I mean, there are exceptions to that, but most of them. I mean, Clinton was 3 times the number of George W. Bush, and certainly George H.W. Bush seems to have issued fewer than anybody. I mean, I'm taking Biden out of this because his term hasn't finished yet, and he probably will issue more on his last day. But I mean, Jimmy Carter, well over 500 compared to President Ford, and okay, he was only in office for 2 years, but he was around the 400 mark. Lyndon Johnson, he's just under 1,000, and Richard Nixon was about 800. Does the politics of this matter?
Well, hard to say why as far as Republicans versus Democrats, but certainly the idea behind the pardon power in the Constitution, and even going, back to common law England, is mercy, is that the criminal justice system has problems, that people fall through the cracks. It can be quite harsh and unfair. And there needs to be a grown-up in the room that can sort of make sure things don't go haywire and issue pardons for mercy when someone has been unfairly convicted. So to the extent to which presidents believe in that theory, maybe there'll be more pardons along those lines. I mean, Barack Obama in 2013 issued mass commutations for low-level criminal or drug offenses that did not involve violence. Joe Biden's issued mass pardons for people that were convicted of marijuana use. So it offers the possibility, actually, of tremendous grace and mercy, but presidents increasingly haven't used it that way, in part, I think, because the American public is very responsive at the ballot box to a argument that a president's going to be tough on crime. The more we incarcerate, the better type idea, even though $80 billion a year of American taxpayer dollars go into the incarceration system in the United States. And at the federal level, there's no parole. There's no way to get out of jail, even if you, have exonerating evidence. It's extremely difficult. So in theory, the pardon stands to correct that injustice, but presidents generally have shied away from it because of the kind of pushback we're seeing Joe Biden getting today.
Kim, thank you very much indeed. That's Professor Kim Whaley. Her book is called Pardon Power, How the Pardon System Works and Why. Well, I would suggest it doesn't work. It's something that I think we in this country would just find inconceivable. Somebody here says, get off your anti-democratic rant. Well, A, I haven't ranted, and B, I've just pointed out the facts that Democratic presidents, compared to their Republican counterparts, tend to issue far more pardons. That is a fact. It's not anti-democratic. It is just a fact. We'll come to more of your calls in a moment, and we'll get more on the situation in Syria as well.
Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
Now, Syrian and Russian jets have intensified air attacks in Idlib city and positions in Aleppo as the government of President Bashar al-Assad tries to slow the advance of opposition fighters. Now, the raids today followed big gains by the opposition over the past few days that has greatly shifted the front line in Syria's long-running war. Well, let's get the latest on this from Dan Saber, who's Defence and Security Editor of The Guardian. Dan, very good evening to you. This all seems to have come out of nowhere, doesn't it?
Well, in a way, yes, but everything's connected, Ian, and I think it's related to the war in Ukraine and also the other wars in the Middle East involving Israel in particular, Israel's conflict with Hezbollah, and there was, of course, a ceasefire on that last week. But the Syrian civil war never went away. And what we're talking about is a sort of pocket of Syria, northwest Syria, around the city of Idlib, which has always been held by a group of rebels enjoying some support from the Turks. Sunni Islamists used to be part of al-Qaeda, which sounds very bad, but are trying to claim that they've sort of changed their ways somewhat. They always had this sort of pocket of land there. It's been a ceasefire since 2020, but what's happened is the position of the Syrian government, Bashar al-Assad in Damascus, has got worse. And his two main backers were, number one, Russia, now tied up in Ukraine, and number two, Iran and Iran's proxies like Hezbollah, who've been on the receiving end of serious and devastating, in the case of Hezbollah, serious and devastating attacks from Israel.
So in terms of choosing a side, if we were to do that, it would be quite difficult, wouldn't it? Because they both seem to be as evil as each other.
I wouldn't quite characterise it like that, but I understand why you are, in that Assad has never been an ally of the UK, and the Syrian war has been was a particularly violent and brutal conflict of the last decade. Use of poison gas, things like that. I think it's a bit unclear. I don't think we quite know, exactly the sort of the composition of the rebel groups and how they want to. The main rebel group and some of its allies and how they want to proceed. What we do know is they've caught the Syrian government unawares, and 1 minute they're in this sort of pocket in Idlib that had been quite quiet for the last four or plus years, and suddenly they launch an offensive the same day actually that Israel has a ceasefire with Hezbollah. I don't think that's a coincidence. I'm not saying that they're in cahoots with anyone. I'm just saying it was timing on their part. And the Syrians clearly weren't ready. And the next thing they know, it's sort of 3 days later, they've captured Aleppo, which is Syria's second city, scene of fierce fighting, of course, in the civil war in the middle of the last decade, but has been relatively peaceful since. They captured that within 3 days, and now on the march. So it's really unclear how stable Assad's regime is going to be and what could happen in Syria.
And how reliant is Syria on Russian air power?
Syria has been very reliant on Russian air power. The truth was Assad was losing or certainly struggling to win the Syrian civil war until the Russians intervened around 2015, 2016. There's a Russian air base in Syria. There's still, Russian jets are still active there, and they've been bombing over the last 2 or 3 days, killing dozens of people, maybe a couple of hundred people or more actually in the last few days. Doesn't seem to have stopped the rebel advance. But if you've got aeroplanes in the sky, they're a potent weapon. They're a potent weapon, and they're not if you don't have them. Russia doesn't use an awful lot of its aviation in Ukraine. It might be one of the few things it can spare. It can't really spare people or other more conventional arms.
Dan, thank you. That's Dan Saber, Defence and Security Editor of The Guardian. Well, let's get another perspective on this from Mutlu Siviroglu, who is a journalist for the US broadcaster Voice of America, specialising in Kurdish and Syrian affairs. Mutlu, thank you very much for coming on the programme. Now, Aleppo, which I understand is actually a bigger city than Damascus, obviously we remember our TV pictures from 10 years ago when the whole city was virtually obliterated. Presumably it's been trying to get back on its feet, and now this comes along. How are ordinary Syrians coping with this?
Everybody's surprised for sure. Everybody's shocked. Like you say, after 10 years, the life was normal. The hopes were high that Syria is maybe approaching the solution. But this has come to surprise to so many people as the city quickly fell. Assad regime did not put any fight. Some analysts believe that this was carefully planned, while the Iranian has been cornered. The Hezbollah fighters have been busy with fighting against Israel. Turkey especially took the momentum and took this as an opportunity. But this is a surprise for many. And in this picture, the biggest victim are the Kurds, because there are thousands or tens of thousands of Kurds are besieged, civilians are besieged. Their little enclaves have been besieged by HTS and Turkey-backed Syrian National Army groups. So the situation is dire. The weather is cold. Uncertainty is there. But everybody is trying to digest what's going on.
What do you think is going to happen over the next couple of weeks? Because obviously it did come as a big surprise to the Syrian authorities. They have got Russia involved with airstrikes. But how do you see this developing?
I think the Syrian regime is just trying to overcome the shock. Right now, their focus seems to be the Hama area, trying to protect their coast. Russia has already been busy with Ukraine, has been in a difficult situation in Ukraine. Russia is not as strong as it used to be in terms of Syria. So their priority seems to be protecting the seaports to prevent HTS reaching the coastal line. But the regime has been making some comeback since yesterday in terms of putting fight back, according to their outlets, in Homs, in Aleppo countryside. But it's really, really very hard to. It's Middle East. You can not even see 1 hour later what's going to happen. It's very, very hard to predict. Turkey, on one hand, trying to make use of the lame duck session, what they call it in the U.S., when there is no administration already lost the election. The new administration isn't starting until January 20. Turkey has some ambitions. Some analysts I talked to in Syria, they believe. So it's really hard to predict, but I can tell you that tough days are waiting. But again, one thing I want to draw attention of your listeners are that there are tens of thousands of civilians that start where international media hasn't picked up yet. But these people are civilians, Kurdish civilians, displaced people that expelled from their hometown in Afrin when Turkey's olive branch operation expelled them from their homes. They were living in camps in what's called Shaba region in Aleppo countryside, and these people have been besieged. They are trying to make to the more eastern parts of Syria under SDF control, the U.S. and British ally SDF. So their situation is very, very tough, and a civilian tragedy once more in Syria is unfolding. The uncertainty is there. Really, very hard to predict what's coming in tomorrow or 24 hours, 48 hours. Very hard, but things are getting worse for sure.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Mutlu Siviroglu, journalist for the US broadcaster Voice of America. A couple of texts on the Hunter Biden situation. Ian, this pardoning of one's son is the type of behaviour you'd expect from a typical dictatorship. You might as well say it's one law for us and another for you plebs. Saddam Hussein once said, "The law is whatever I write on a piece of paper." I'll leave it there, says Simon in Lancashire. And here we have David, who says, American presidents dishing out pardons to family and friends is really no worse than UK PMs dishing out peerages to their family and friends. I can't remember. I'm sure there probably is one down the years, but I can't remember a prime minister who's issued a peerage to a family member. Equally corrupt, other side of the same coin, says David. Right, we'll take more of your calls on Hunter Biden and the pardoning of him by his father, Joe Biden, in just a moment. And on cross question at 8, we have, trying to reach for his list of guests, Sam Lister, Associate Editor of the Daily Express, Mark Ferguson, Labour MP for Gateshead Central and Wickham, Jim Shannon, DUP MP for Strangford, who's the party's spokesperson for Health and Human Rights, and Mark Pack, the President of the Liberal Democrats. So the number to call if you'd like to put in a call to cross question, 0345 6060 973.
Iain Dale on LBC.
7:49 on LBC. Let's go back to your calls on Hunter Biden. Jerry's in Burton upon Trent. Jerry, hello.
Oh, good evening, Ian. I really enjoyed your presentation. Can I just say very briefly that so often when you get criticised for being too sympathetic to the left or the right, I think you hold a really good balance, and I'd like to congratulate you on that.
Well, that's very kind of you, Jerry. If only everybody was as sagacious as you.
Well, they just have to listen, don't they? I mean, that's all that needs to be done. Just listen. Tune into other presenters. You might clearly have more of an argument, but not with Ian. No, he's straight down the line.
Okay, Jerry, come on, get on with it.
Right. I'd just like to say about this pardon business, when you go back with Trump to the time that he had Hillary Clinton against the ropes and he first won, he could have easily gone for her, easily. And she was clearly guilty of all the things she got up to, but he was kind of trying to be conciliatory, and I think just let it go. Big mistake, because it's the Democrats that are pernicious. Throughout his time, they were after him. The facts just got ignored. The press he gets over here is appalling, because although he certainly has his failings, the facts never really get revealed, Ian. And the interesting thing about this whole case of the pardoning of Hunter Biden, like your previous contributor phoned up and was explaining some of the background about Burisma and so on, one of the interesting things about this is Biden threw the coin and he said, I'm a decent guy, it doesn't matter, it's my son, I'm definitely not giving him a pardon. And that was kind of his electioneering guiding sort of principle to polarise against Trump. I follow the law, not like this other guy. And you think credibility for the party, really shocking. So he kind of had a win-win situation. Were he to win, of course he could still pardon his son anyway and just carry on and everything's fine. But by losing, he realises that all roads lead back to the family and he had to pardon Hunter Biden. And it's not just those two court cases where he's technically convicted for the crimes, but also he's looking to pardon him not just for those two offences, Ian, which is usually what a pardon's for. It's to give him immunity for the previous 10 years. And there's an awful lot of murky nonsense in those 10 years when the Biden family enriched themselves by $13 million, you know.
OK, Jerry, thank you very much. Diane in Orpington says, Ian, I may be wrong, but I'm sure Boris Johnson issued a peerage to his brother Joe. No, you're absolutely right, Diane, on that. I had forgotten that. Doesn't quite fall under this kind of category, though, because Joe Johnson had been a cabinet minister, and it is quite normal for ex-cabinet ministers to get a peerage. But I hear what you say, just proving how balanced I am. Thanks, Jerry. Raj is in Manchester. Hello, Raj.
Hi, Ian. I'm not going to praise you like your last caller did.
No, don't.
Exactly.
Once the programme is enough.
Yeah, exactly. So, Ian, I'm going to try and break it down to its most basic level, right? He's a father, and one of his sons has committed suicide, if I remember rightly. And he's only got one son.
No. He was killed in a car crash.
Oh, killed in a car crash. Sorry. Yeah, that's right. But he's dead. He's died, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Now, on the basic level, I think, had it not been Trump coming into power, he wouldn't have pardoned him because of exactly what's happening now, the conversation that all the world is having. Now, the bottom line is this one, I think. However you look at it, he's prepared to put all of his 40, 50 years of politician, his reputation, on the line, essentially throw it down the pan for his son. And it doesn't matter he's not prepared to let it happen, that there's a chance of his son, the only son left, dying, for however it happens in jail, whether that's some sort of a thing that happened or whether he's on drugs, but there's a chance of him not surviving his jail term. And for that, he's thrown all of his all of that power, all of that reputation down the pan for that. And I praise that guy for that, because he's looking after his son, not because he's just trying to deputise him and let him off the hook, because he's not prepared to take the risk of anything happening to his son when Trump's in power. I think that. And had it been anyone else being in power, I don't think he would have let him. He would have done it for that reason. And I think that's what people. I wouldn't think twice about if it was my son, my only living son. I mean, he's thrown all of his reputation down. That's what it means to him for what he's done. So, I think he should be sort of praised in this, because he's done that. His reputation is completely gone now in all of history, hasn't it? Really.
Yeah, but what about all the other parents who maybe have sons or daughters up before the courts? They aren't in a position to be able to do that.
They haven't got Trump as an enemy, have they?
Well, there might be some of them that have. That's absolutely the case. But Raj, it's to your credit that you're being so benevolent. Thank you very much indeed. Now, before we come to tonight's cross question, let's hear a little of the latest episode of the President's, Prime Minister's, Kings and Queens podcast. This week, we discussed the reign of William II, also known as William Rufus, who was one of the sons of William the Conqueror. I was joined for this episode by the journalist and writer Emma Mason, who told me what William Rufus is best remembered for.
Probably his undignified end, rather than anything he achieved during his reign. He was killed in rather suspicious circumstances in the New Forest in August 1100. Was it a hunting accident or was it an assassination? He was killed, took an arrow to the chest whilst out on a hunting expedition with friends, and his younger brother Henry, who swiftly took the throne thereafter. It is curious, I think, that he lost his older brother Richard to a hunting accident in the New Forest back when William was a teenager. And actually, just a few months before William's death, his nephew, Robert's son, also named Richard, he too was killed in a hunting accident in the New Forest. So on one hand, that could tell you that hunting was a very dangerous activity in this time period, and it certainly was. But was that a coincidence, or did that death or those multiple deaths serve as inspiration for those who wanted to bring William's reign to an end? I think it's an interesting theory, and I think looking at Henry's conduct upon William's death, I think it certainly raises some eyebrows. So there's lots of William is shot in the chest with an arrow. He pulls off the shaft and collapses and promptly dies. And there's chaos and confusion. Walter Tyrrell, who is thought to have fired the arrow in question, he flees the scene, and Henry, instead of rushing to his brother's aid, as you might have thought he would do, he instead heads straight for Winchester, to the royal treasury and demands the keys, and he's crowned king shortly thereafter. So certainly looks suspicious. He showed very little regard for his brother dying in the New Forest, and he certainly had the motive. Your earlier author, Dominic Selwood, makes the excellent point that Henry being crowned so quickly afterwards, that probably couldn't have happened without significant pre-planning. He would have had to have been confident that he had support, and that he could take the crown. So it's all very suspicious, I think. So if it was an accident, it was a very convenient one.
It seems to me a reign of little domestic achievement, but his main achievement was fending off all of those who wanted to replace him, I suppose, until he was assassinated. Were there any other achievements?
Well, some have said it was a really uninspiring reign, but in my mind, he was probably a slightly underrated and underappreciated king. Bear in mind, he successfully defended his father's kingdom against all the odds. He really did keep multiple rebellions at bay. He had very respected military skills, which may even have surpassed those of his father. He's also been likened to Julius Caesar, known to be very courageous and brave in battle. Even his most staunch critics couldn't deny his skills on the battlefield. But of course, he has gone down in history as a highly unpopular, an irreligious man. Again, largely because of the monastic chroniclers who were writing about him. But I do think William probably did have many reasons to feel that he was a very wronged man throughout his reign. He was betrayed at multiple occasions by his family members, his brothers, his uncles. He did have a tough time of it by all accounts.
That's the journalist and writer Emma Mason telling me about the reign and mysterious death of William II, also known as William Rufus. And you can hear our full conversation by subscribing to the President's, Prime Minister's, Kings and Queens podcast on Global Player. Well, coming up in a moment on LBC, it's Monday's Cross Question. Joining me on the panel, Sam Lister, Associate Editor of the Daily Express, Mark Ferguson, Labour MP for Gateshead Central and Wickham, Jim Shannon, DUP MP for Strangford, who's the party's spokesperson for health and human rights, and Mark Pack, the President of the Liberal Democrats. There are 3 ex-bloggers in the studio tonight. It's up to you to guess which of the 2 aren't. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you'd like to put a question to our panel. You can WhatsApp us on the same number or text 84850 and do watch us on Global Player.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. 2 minutes past 8. Welcome to Monday's Cross Question. Joining me on the panel are blogger number 1, Mark Pack, President of the Liberal Democrats. You're still actually kind of blogging, aren't
still
you,
a blogger,
Mark?
not an ex-blogger yet.
No. Blogger number 2, Mark Ferguson, Labour MP for Gateshead Central and Wickham. Used to run I was going to say Lloyd's List, Labour List,
yes.
back in the day. That's how we first met. And I'm blogger number 3, but I won't bother introducing myself. Jim Shannon, have you ever thought about it? You're not a blogger.
I don't have
No, but you know what it is.
I know what it is, but that's as far as it goes.
Jim, Jim is DUP MP for Strangford. He's also the party's spokesperson for health and human rights. And Sam Lister is journalist on the Daily Express, associate editor. Far too grand to soil yourself with blogging.
Oh, I'm just behind the curve, that's the problem. I've only just discovered TikTok, so...
They are here to answer your questions for the next hour. The way to get in touch is to give us a call on 0345 6060 060 You can WhatsApp us on the same number. You can text 84850. You can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And you can watch us on Global Player.
Wow.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
I would love someone to ask a question about the Irish election, because I've spent most of the weekend watching the results, because I've always been against PR for national elections, but it doesn't half add some sort of danger into it in a way. It's incredibly unpredictable. So anybody wants to ask our panel about that? I'm sure Jim has a few views on what's going on in Dublin. But let's go to our first text question. It's Ollie in Ipswich. He says, should the government really be getting involved with Greg Wallace's behaviour? An interesting way of phrasing that. A Downing Street spokesperson says the MasterChef presenter's defence of himself and criticism of those making allegations about him were inappropriate and misogynistic, while the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has been holding talks with the BBC following these allegations being made. Mark Ferguson, has the world gone mad?
I think it's not my top priority for today, but I understand that a lot of people will be interested. What's happened to Greg Wallace? I'm personally not a Mastermind watcher myself, but ultimately...
MasterChef.
Sorry, Mastermind or MasterChef. I wouldn't get on either. I can't cook and I can't remember the name of the chef.
So you'll finish. Carry on.
But ultimately, one of the oddities I've noticed transitioning into the world of being an elected politician is people will ask you all sorts, and the best thing to do is just to give a straight answer, and that's what sounds like has happened.
But, I mean, should Number 10 really be commenting on something like this?
Should people be asking, is perhaps the question. Because if they know commented, and it's like, well, why don't people care about the views that have been put out there?
Do you know when this all started? It started when Shamir died on Coronation Street, and Tony Blair was asked for a comment, and he gave a comment, and that set the precedent, didn't it?
It did. I do remember that.
No, yeah, Samir, wasn't it?
Wasn't it Free Deirdre Rashid?
Exactly. Yes.
And she was. And I don't really know about this because the Prime Minister was asked. I've never watched Coronation Street before in my life.
Questions were asked in the House.
I do remember.
So, Mark was basically saying it's your fault. I'm not you personally. The journalistic profession.
I have sat through hundreds of these lobby briefings, and the press will.
Because you were political.
I was political editor. This was part of the day job. There's 2 briefings a day. You would ask a range of questions about anything, cultural things, social things, obviously the political issues, policy matters. There is a form of words that Number 10 can use for issues like this, and what they would ordinarily say is, it's a matter for the BBC. It's a matter for the BBC. We know on Friday they were asked, I think for half an hour solidly, repeated questions about Louise Hay and what she'd been up to, and they stonewalled every single one of those questions. Yet on this matter, they're quite happy to wade in. Why are they happy to wade in? Because they've got a lot of problems. This is a bit of a distraction.
Jim Shannon.
I think it's probably a wee bit more than that. With respect, I don't think you can ignore the voices of middle-aged women, which Greg Wallace referred to. I think that was wrong. I think his apology tried to sort some of the issues out in his earlier comments, which were unfortunate. It's about middle-aged women. It's about young women. It's about for me, it's all about the hurt that people have. I think you can't ignore that. And is it right for Lisa Nandy to be involved? Well, it's at that level, perhaps, that maybe she should be. And I think that's her job. How it's done has to be handled very, very sensitively. I've always had faith in the justice system. So really for me, it will be what the justice system can do in the right way forward. The one thing that you can't ignore, that the allegations by 13 women have been made, therefore substantial, and they have to be investigated, and there has to be an answer. That's how I feel.
OK, Mark Pack?
Yeah, I'm much more with Jim on this, I think, because there is a really big continuing problem about sexual harassment in workplaces, and that is an issue that isn't just for politicians. It's not something the government can solve on its own, but nor is it an issue that politicians should say is nothing to do with us. So I think, I'm very much in sympathy with sort of Mark and Sam if it's a question about, what's happened to a fictional character in a soap opera or whatever. But actually on something like this, given the seriousness of the allegations, but also because it epitomises a wider problem in society, actually I think, fair credit to the government for being really brutally frank in their views.
I just think on that, the briefing on Friday where they were repeatedly asked about Louise Hay, who apparently committed a fraud. She was a cabinet minister. That, I think, people think is a serious issue. They stonewalled for half an hour, and yet on this one, they're quite happy to wade in, which is actually it's not their responsibility.
Just you say Louise Hay, because I
don't know, is it Hay or Haig?
Well, I think it's Haig, but now you're making me doubt myself, because I texted a podcaster who said Louise Hay, and I said, no, it's Haig, and now you're making me think I may be wrong.
We need a ruling on this. Perhaps she can ring in if she's listening.
She could call in and tell us.
Well, she hasn't got anything else to do, has she? Sorry, that was cruel. Charlotte, on a follow-up text, says, should the BBC bosses be worried that once again they fumbled a story about bad behaviour? They're still showing MasterChef tonight too, which I'm sure this morning they said they weren't going to, but they are. Given that they'd had quite a few warnings about Greg Wallace's behaviour or some of the things that he was saying, you would have thought they might have taken this a bit more seriously before now. Mark Pack.
Yeah, I think the BBC doesn't seem to have a particularly well-functioning sort of response to allegations like this. They do seem to struggle somewhat, but I can understand why they are going ahead with the screening, because after all, yes, there is a presenter who's in the firing line, but actually all of the participants in the competition, this is, perhaps the biggest moment in their professional lives, and actually to have all of that taken away by having the shows dropped because of something that wasn't their fault but was the fault of the star presenter would have actually be really quite tough on them. So I think probably on balance, if I was having to make the decision, I would go ahead with showing it. But I think the BBC certainly needs to look at how it can further improve its processes, because it is worrying just over how many years back these allegations seem to go.
2018, I think.
And that's
2017.
Yeah,
that's Mimir said.
Any advance in 2017?
Yeah.
Sam?
Well, I think I have actually I hot-footed it over here after finishing filing my column on just this very issue, which was about how actually the BBC is the real problem here. Greg Wallace, his behaviour was known to many, many people. As Mimir, the broadcaster, she used to work at the BBC. She now works on a rival broadcaster.
Well saved.
Nearly, but anyway, I've saved it. Because she was conscious of how the BBC systems worked, she emailed a series of people in 2017 to say, I am telling you this behaviour is unacceptable, but more importantly, I don't want you to be able to say years down the line that you were not warned. She was very, very explicit about that. They ignored those emails. This was they were quite happy to let Greg Wallace behave how he behaved while he was making money for them. He's a very popular presenter. They gave him another show. He's clearly very popular with viewers. That's why they give him an extra show. As soon as women have got frustrated with the processes at the BBC and gone public themselves, they washed their hands of him. They should have dealt with it at the time. They didn't.
See, why do you think that is? Because Asma Mir, I know her a bit. She's nobody's fool. She's a serious woman, and was in a serious role at the BBC at that time. Why wouldn't they take someone like that seriously?
I don't know. And the only conclusion I can draw is because he was a cash cow for them. He fronted one of the biggest shows on the channel. The BBC researches how popular its presenters are constantly. If he was not popular, they would have booted him off at the time. I'm sure you would be top of the rankings, Ian. But that's it. They constantly research these things. They would not have tolerated this had he been low down in the rankings. They put up with his bad behaviour because he was popular, and then they washed their hands of him when it hits the headlines. And I think that is a real institutional problem in the BBC that they just cannot seem to get a grip of.
I've just got this image now of an LBC league table of presenters, and sort of every quarter, well, Ian, you better watch out, you're nearly in the relegation zone. Jim, this is not the first time this has happened in the BBC in recent memory, or indeed going back many, many years. Why do they keep making the same mistakes?
You don't have to go back too far to be reminded of something that happened just a few months ago. I think there's I'm not sure I can use this word, there's a canker in the BBC. There's unfortunately when they're confronted with something, they don't seem to address it. I think Sam's right. I think they tend to push it down the road or kick the can down the road and hope it'll go away or hope that it's not true. The fact is that there is an acceptance in the BBC of some of the things that are happening. I think when the allegations are made, I understand that everybody's innocent until proven guilty. I understand that. That's a system that I would like it to be in every case. But whenever these are brought to attention, I would have thought that perhaps maybe they should have been keeping an eye on all the things that were happening so they're able to respond. What you can't ignore, these are allegations. They're made faithfully by the 13 people who have done that. Therefore, it's not just one person. It's a group of ladies of a number of ages and different jobs. So my opinion is clear. If those allegations are made, an investigation must happen. It should have happened earlier.
Mark?
I agree with the vast majority of what the other panellists have said. I mean, there clearly is an issue, as Jim has rightly said. There's more than a dozen complainants. That's incredibly serious. What I would say is we are kidding ourselves if we say this is a BBC problem rather than a problem in a lot of employers. Yeah, like I've worked in a number of different settings. My previous job, I was a trade unionist, and I have therefore interacted with a lot of different types of workplaces, and we've got to be honest with ourselves. As a trade unionist, I would hear from time to time about people in different settings who faced challenges like these.
I think the FBU have had issues.
I'm not talking about trade unions, I'm talking about the workplaces.
Well, the trade unions also have had these issues. It's, I mean, as you say, it's throughout society.
It's a societal issue, I guess, is what I'm saying. And the BBC is a very important part of our society and our culture. And the manifestation of that in the BBC is obviously going to gain a lot of attention. But if we just talk about it as a BBC issue rather than as a societal issue, I think we do potentially leave ourselves open to not challenging this more broadly.
What about the fact that, I mean, I was astonished on Friday night, it was the lead item on the 10 o'clock news on the BBC. Somebody here, Lorraine, says, I can't believe Greg Wallace was the #1 news reporter on ITV News this evening. I mean, isn't the media in danger of eating itself? When I came into the office today and said, I don't want to talk about Greg Wallace. But everyone is talking about Greg Wallace. So guess what we're going to do at 9 o'clock? We're going to do a phone-in on, although we're going to do a phone on how widespread is this throughout society rather than concentrate on him. That's the hook, he says defensively.
Yeah. And what was the first topic you picked on this hour, Ian, as well?
I didn't. I blame Corey for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, although, you know, as I said, I think this is an important issue and it's right in a way. The governor's commented on it. When I sort of look at the news headlines, you think, what about Syria? What about the French government possibly falling apart? What about Ukraine? Or, you know, domestically, there are so many other important issues as well. I can see why the BBC sort of always feels it has to be seen to be reporting itself. But I do wish News Values did put one or two other stories at the top of the list at the moment.
Well, we're going to talk about one or two other stories in just a moment.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
It's 17 minutes past 8 on Cross Question. We have Jim Shannon, DUP MP for Strangford, who is just about to relate a hilarious anecdote to me about someone he met at an airport. But sadly, we went back on air. Mark Ferguson is Labour MP for Gateshead Central and Wickham. Sam Lister is Associate Editor of the Daily Express. And Mark Pack is President of the Liberal Democrats. What does President... It sounds a very grand title. What do you actually do?
Chair meetings.
That doesn't sound very exciting.
And answer lots of emails from members.
Angry emails.
Yeah, occasionally angry.
Does it get angry?
Yeah. But actually, the lovely thing is that people, the angrier the email, you must find this a little bit with audience feedback as well, Ian, you know, the angrier the person in the email, the more surprised they are if you actually send them a polite response. And so I've got to this position where I think the angrier the email, the better it is, because the easier it's going to be to impress them.
Do you ever succumb to temptation and send an angry one back?
I've learnt not to over the years.
Right, let's go to Gordon in Hampstead, who has a question. He says, before the 2020 US election, Joe Biden said that character is on the ballot. Is he a hypocrite, or is the pardoning of his son Hunter just what any loving parent would do? Sam Lister.
I have been shocked by this, and I don't know if that's naive on my behalf, because he obviously did make this very clear statement that this would not be something he intended to do. I think the American legal system anyway, I find completely baffling. It's so remote from our system. It's so all to do with money. I think it's a very different beast, and I think we think Americans are very similar to us, but actually they are a world apart, and this to me just smacks of corruption, and I cannot understand how this can be allowed to take place in the country that is the leader of the free world. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Jim, pardons. In different circumstances, Northern Ireland has had a bit of experience of this.
Yeah, but I think to dwell on the question of Biden, look, I'm a father of 3 boys. Would I want to protect my boys? Yes, I would. But if, as President Biden has done, has sent out a message which seems to indicate that being the son of a politician, he may have been harshly treated. I think that's what he's saying. My concern is that it sends out the very wrong message. The father who loves his son equally, who just doesn't happen to be a politician, but who happens to love his son, but realises his son has done wrong. I think it's wrong. I think President Biden has stepped over the line. It's sent out, in my opinion, a 2-tier justice system. There's nobody that I haven't spoken to today who tells me the same thing. And probably the worst thing about this is something that's been lying since. It's been on for a number of years. There's been criminal charges. There's been offences put forward. It probably blackens us all as politicians, I think, because people say, well, if you're a politician, you can do this. And if you're not a politician, well, then you're subject to the law.
One rule for us.
Yeah, and I think he's done the wrong thing. It doesn't matter how much he loves his son. It's the wrong thing.
Because they're saying, well, it was a politically motivated trial, because I think it's in California and Delaware that the charges were laid, both democratic states. So it's a bit difficult to make that stand up, I would have thought. Mark Pack.
Yeah, I just find this whole idea baffling because, we have our own controversies and scandals, even sometimes with, say, resignation honours with prime ministers here. But imagine if Liz Truss had got to pick which 6 convicted criminals she wanted to... But I just find baffling the idea that in a democracy or any country with supposedly a functioning sort of legal and judicial system, you can say, well, actually, there's this politician who can just pretty much pick whatever, whoever they want, and say, yep, slate wipe clean for them completely. They don't have to be any exonerating circumstances, no expression of remorse, nothing like that. Imagine if Liz Truss had picked six criminals, how outraged everyone would be. Given they have the system in the US, as Jim's saying, I can understand why a father would want to use the system that exists to protect his son. But sadly, sometimes, if you choose to be a politician, you have to do the right thing rather than put your family first.
An academic who's got a new book out on the presidential pardon system. So she's been a busy woman today. And she was saying it does go back to the paragraph 2 of the American Constitution. So it's not a new thing. This has been going on since 1789 or whenever it was. And it was based on the royal pardon. And, of course, in previous centuries in this country, the king or queen could issue royal pardons. Obviously, that's slightly more tricky now. Mark?
I think we've all seen American films, haven't we, where someone's about to be sentenced to death and they're being executed and they've been on death row, and then the phone rings at the end of the hall and they pick it up and it's the governor granting someone clemency. And it's very dramatic and entertaining, but it's always been completely alien to me as a British viewer, the idea that a politician outside of the legal system... But there are a lot of aspects of the American legal system that I find quite alien. The idea of being appointed to a circuit court or the Supreme Court and having to go through confirmation hearings, that's very different in tone and scale to the way judicial appointments are made in this country. It's not for me to say whether a president should or shouldn't use the power they have available to them, but it's certainly not something I would relish us having in this country.
You've become so diplomatic since you've become an MP. I must not criticise President Biden. I can see going...
I won't be criticising any presidents, past, present or future.
Very wise.
Right. Including Mark. He's going to go far, isn't he? Right. Ronan in Clapham says... With nearly a 6% drop in the Sinn Féin vote in the Irish election, is a united Ireland further away than ever. Well, of course, the people of the Republic of Ireland went to the polls on Friday. It's very much, it seems to be status quo, that there's going to now be another coalition between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. They may not even have to have other parties in the coalition this time. The Greens have been obliterated. They have no representation. And the Sinn Féin vote went down from 25 to 19%, though I think their seat tally is about the same. Jim Shannon.
Obviously, it looks to me very much like the pundits and the pollsters indicated that Sinn Féin were going to top the poll, and that was what they were saying on the Friday night, and on the people they questioned as they left the polling stations. Quite clearly that wasn't the case. It reminds me a wee bit of the US presidential race as well, where forgive me everyone, liberal elite were pushing forward a certain...
That's you, Mark. Well, liberal anyway.
Who were pushing an agenda which quite clearly they hadn't spoken to the people. I think this is the same thing in Sinn Féin. They're now lost 130,000 votes, I understand. Their poll, as you rightly say, are down 5-6%. It looks like the two major parties, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, will have a partnership which will not need anyone else to do that. It tells me that the pollsters have again got it wrong. Sinn Féin have lost their way with the electorate. They were pushing, I think, if I'm reading it correctly, as an observer from the north looking down south, the immigration was a massive issue. The fact that Hutch nearly got elected.
Let's just explain that. This is Gerard Hutch, who's a gangland leader in Dublin, came within a whisker of being elected to the Dáil. I mean, what does that tell us?
It tells me that he probably listened to the immigration issue, which was very, very rife in the Republic of Ireland, and whatever else, I wouldn't really want to say anything else about it, to be truthful with you, and I think I would be best not to. The courts are clear where those issues are, but look, Sinn Féin aren't any further ahead in pushing for the United Ireland. They won't be the big party, and even with a popular vote in the Republic, they are the biggest party in Northern Ireland, but I'll say the polls tell me, in Northern Ireland anyway, that those who wish to have a border poll, the numbers are less. Why is that? Unions are quite clear that they don't want it, but there are many people who vote perhaps for the nationalist parties who are small union as you. They see the greater good to stay within the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So is it closer today? My grandchildren won't see it, and I suspect maybe their great grandchildren won't see it either.
Okay, Mark?
The position spelled out very clearly in the Good Friday Agreement what the circumstances would be for that to happen, and I don't think that has fundamentally changed as a result of this week's elections. I mean, the Irish elections are really interesting. They really do encapsulate that. The people have spoken, and now we're waiting to hear what they've said as they go through a whole weekend of counting. I mean, I'm sure the likes of Mark and I, and certainly Jim and yourself, Ian, I'm sure you as well, Sam. It's very interesting for us to flick over under the news and sort of, it's almost like watching a test match in cricket. It's like you flick back over and it's like, oh, I see they've gone slightly ahead. And you.
But one thing I did notice, I've become quite addicted to the Irish Times Election Daily podcast, and they spent all of the different journalists and pundits that appeared on the podcast. It was a really interesting listen. But they didn't really discuss issues like immigration very much, or housing, which I think were the two big issues. It was all about what happens afterwards, who's going to form the government, but what if the Labour go down?
People love the horse race, don't they?
They do, and they don't often you wonder whether the Irish media were sort of really played their role in this properly.
Well, it's the same thing with in the USA, I can't say that. I mean, they talked about what Kamala Harris had done, but she was so tied in with Biden that was never going to win. The issues of what the ordinary person said, it was about economy, it was a price of goods, it was can I buy a house? Those are the questions I asked myself. Can I buy a house? Can I pay the grocery bill? And what Trump did, Trump gave them the answer. And that's where they got it wrong. They should have listened to the people. And I think Sinn Féin forgot what the issues are. And you're right, by the way, the issues were immigration, number one. There were housing as well.
But it's funny, the anti-immigration parties didn't do very well.
78,000 votes, I think.
Yeah, which is not very many. Sam?
Well, just on the immigration issue, I mean, the kind of wider politics of Ireland, I will leave to people who know better. But I can just kind of recount a quick tale from about 6 or 7 months, actually it must be 7 or 8 months ago, where I went to a do and encountered an Irish diplomat who harangued me for a good 20 minutes about your Prime Minister is terrible, your Prime Minister is a bad man, because it was
diplomatic.
No, it wasn't diplomatic. He might have been slightly in his cups, but he was very angry
about the ambassador.
Just making it clear, it wasn't the ambassador. But he was very angry because it was at that time when we were having the row with the Republic of Ireland about migrants crossing through Northern Ireland into the Republic, and there was the tent city in Dublin. He was very angry with Rishi Sunak about how that was being dealt with. And so I think it's quite interesting that migration is an issue, but it hasn't really translated into votes. I think there is a certain kind of demeanour in the elite in the Republic, and perhaps the media that they don't want to really address this as an issue. He told me Ireland is a country that embraces migration, and I think that they are struggling to kind of deal with this change in perception on the ground. But obviously it hasn't really translated into votes, so I don't quite know where you go with that, but it is an issue that people, I don't think, really want to address in the Republic at this moment.
I mean, one thing that really strikes me about the extended count is, I mean, not only is it great for geeks who love, great, we've got several days worth of, election counting, but actually I think it helps address some of those issues with media coverage that you mentioned, Iain, because the media coverage about the count is so much about whose votes are going to whom, etc. And that gets you exactly into all the sorts of issues that we've just been talking about. And so it's not speculation, it's not off on, wrong assumptions about who's going to win. Actually, the political news coverage of that 2-3 day count process, I think, is what, we want more political news coverage to be like. So, maybe our plea to British election administrators is slow down the counting, extend the process to...
I know it was like a test match, but I prefer a football match. Over in 90 minutes.
Well, a test match is the best form of cricket, isn't it? You don't want to speed it up.
I'm all right with the 100. There are some forms of modernity in that.
What was fascinating was the parties that people transfer their votes to as their second or third or fourth preferences. And apparently the Sinn Féin leader, Mary Lou MacDonald, had issued instructions that Sinn Féin members should not transfer their votes to the Labour Party, which you would have thought, well, that would be a natural thing for them to do. And of course, the Labour Party now, they're being approached by Sinn Féin about some putative coalition, which, numerically cannot work. But the Labour Party is saying, thank you very much. I'm not sure we want to do that, if that's what you said, if that was the instruction that you gave before the election. Anyway, I feel positively bereft that the counting's over now. But there we are.
Surely you've had your fill of election counts this year, Iain, even for you.
No, you can never have enough.
Quite right.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:34 on LBC. Tomorrow is the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, which isn't a title that trips off the tongue. They could have come up with something a little bit more snappy, but we are going to mark it tomorrow night at 9 with a phone-in, particularly on disability rights. I'll have a disability campaigner with me in the studio, and he'll be taking your calls. Now, let me reintroduce my panel, because I know people often join us at this time. Sam Lister, next to me, is Associate Editor of the Daily Express. Next to her is Mark Pack, President of the Liberal Democrats. To my right, Jim Shannon, DUP MP for Strangford, and Mark Ferguson, Labour MP for Gateshead Central and Wickham. What's been the most surprising thing that you found in your new job in Parliament?
All of the parts of the building that I never knew existed. Genuinely. I've spent a bit of time around Westminster before, but I'll tell you what, Jim, that place is a lot bigger than I realised it was. So there's a lot of corridors you can wander down.
Have you found the shooting range?
There's a shooting
range?
You almost have me there.
It's a rumour. I don't know if it's actually, but it's a
Everything's got the wrong name now.
Sam, it's not there anymore.
Is it not? But it didn't used to exist.
I shot on it.
Did you really?
Yeah. Ian Paisley and I, we were elected in 2010. we found out there was a shooting club, and I says, Ian, we've got to join this club, mate. To get the card, not the House of Commons shooting club.
There's a bad taste joke there somewhere, and I'm searching for it.
Well, we like shooting back home to the... Anyway, that's by the way.
Right, let's move on quickly before... Anyway, Neville in Harrogate says, the Greek Prime Minister has been discussing the Elgin marbles with the British Museum. Is there anything which Starmer's Britain won't give away? Now, Kyriakos Mitsotakis has reportedly held private meetings with officials at the British Museum about the possible return of the Elgin marbles, also known as the Parthenon sculptures, later this year. Mr. Mitsotakis will be meeting with Keir Starmer at Downing Street tomorrow, and they are expected to discuss the marbles. What could possibly go wrong? Mark Pack.
It's an important topic, but no, I think it's very understandable the Greek government wishes to raise it, but I think it's fundamentally a matter for the British Museum. And if the British Museum,
it isn't though, is it? Because there has to be a new Act of Parliament.
Well, exactly. I was going to say, if the British Museum was to decide that it wanted to do something that required a change in the law, then obviously that's something for politicians to get involved in and listen to seriously. But I think it's fundamentally a matter for the British Museum to decide whether that's what it wishes to ask to happen or not. And I've probably got a slightly unpopular view in that when I went to see the Elgin marbles at the British Museum, I was somewhat underwhelmed, not by them themselves, but actually by the presentation of them. So whatever the British Museum decides in these talks, I just think it could do a lot better at how it presents it, and the education opportunities to it's easy to look at them and not realise just what an amazing part of our collective sort of cultural past they are. I think maybe if there's a rich billionaire listening wondering what act of philanthropy they could do, they could bung the British Museum a bit of money to...
But do you think, it's your personal view, that they should stay in this country or go back to Greece?
I mean, I think once you get into trying to untangle, where everything in every museum comes from, it gets horribly messy. It gets horribly complicated. But I think, what we've seen, in some other cases about actually different partnerships between museums, whether you have, agreed exchanges, whether you have, virtual replicas, and in some cases, obviously there have been other arrangements as well. I think there's a lot of scope for productive relationships between, for example, museums in Athens and museums in London. And actually that's probably long-term, the right way to go.
Well, Mark's been very diplomatic. Here's another diplomatic tightrope for you to walk, Mark.
I'm going to come with a radical position, which is agreeing wholeheartedly with the other Mark. No, it is a matter for the British Museum, and as he says, it's difficult to disentangle anything relating to ownership once you're getting back hundreds of years. It's incredibly complicated. Would it happen now? No, and nor should it. But it has happened, and it is right for the British Museum. On the point from sorry, what was the name of the
Neville?
On Neville's point, I do believe one of the senior people at the British Museum is George Osborne, and I'm sure that George has been called many things in his time, but I don't believe that he is any sort of representative of Starmer's Britain, as it were. It's a lot more politically complicated than that.
But the last sentence is quite telling, isn't it? Is there anything which Starmer's Britain won't give away, presumably referring to the Chagos Islands? I mean, this is the sort of thing that if you wanted to send the Daily Mail, sorry to mention that,
other newspapers are
possibly the Daily Express into a tailspin, that would be it, wouldn't it?
And it's not going to be a matter for the Prime Minister. I'm sure it's something that the Greek Prime Minister may raise, but ultimately it's a matter for the British Museum.
Jim?
I wholeheartedly we should hold on to them, I think. They're part of our history, part of our culture. I wouldn't wish to deprive the Greek authorities of something that they feel is theirs, but I think that it should stay with us.
In this case, you will.
In this case, I think the British Museum should hold on to it, unless they would wish to do some exchange. My worry about exchange will always be, of course, Ian, that the exchange may become permanent. Therefore, I think I very, very clearly in the Department of says no, we're not giving them away or giving them back. You mentioned the Chagos Islands. Question. You queue in the chamber today in the Chagos Islands. Luke Pollard done his best to answer the questions, but the fact is that President Trump will be looking for a different deal. So come the new year, whenever he takes over on the 21st of January, that'll be one of his things he will take back. And the British government again, what would he give away? Well, they'll not give away the Chagos Islands.
Sam?
I think you made the point, actually, that if Keir Starmer does want to send a particular message out to the world, to the country, about where his priorities lie, if he wants to show that his priorities are domestic and that, on the side of British people. He would not do this. I think it sends out an odd signal, I think, about what his priorities would be. And I think the Elgin Marble, I don't think he will touch it, because I think that would be incredibly... It would be incredibly foolish, because I think the backlash would be not worth... It's not a political issue that is worth a backlash over.
And it is interesting that whenever we talk about this, and in my 14 years on LBC, believe me, we've talked about it quite regularly, it is something that really gets people very exercised on both sides.
Yeah, and I have a Greek colleague who is very exercised on the opposite side to me. I mean, I wouldn't say actually I am, it's a hill I would want to die on, but I do think it is part of our history. I think being here is part of its history. You know, this is not, you cannot just take something back down the line and pretend those intervening years have not happened. That is now part of its history, part of the history of the marbles.
If they did agree to do this, there are plenty of other claimants of other things that the British Museum has got in all sorts of different African countries, for example.
But I think also there is an issue, a side issue here, where the British Museum itself does not look after things particularly well. We know that there have been various thefts from there. It has a massive archive of artefacts that it never shows. I think that should be more imaginative as an institution. But, you know, I digress when I talk about that.
Just on the Chagos Islands, Nigel Farage has said in the Commons today that he's been contacted, this is a quote, been contacted by very senior officials and advisors from the incoming Republican administration, and every single one of them is appalled at this deal. He went on to suggest the government should have a referendum of the Chagosians. Jim, I mean, I'm not surprised that Republican officials have said that, but we can't have our foreign policy dictated by America, can we? Or do we already?
Well, are we not in a partnership with the United States when it comes to many things? When it comes to security, and this is a security issue. I sat beside our two down from Nigel today, so I heard his comments very, very clearly. Luke Pollard's a good politician. He's a decent man. He's a minister, but he certainly avoided the issue of come the 21st of January, things will be different. My advice, and I think everybody's advice in the House, with great respect, Mark, would be that when it comes to making a deal, they should hold off until the 21st, because President Trump and the United States of America see it as a strategic military base which they want to retain. Many of us in the chamber, including myself and many others, feel undermined by the Labour Party's way forward and to find a solution, which has ignored the Chagosians, by the way. And is it right that there should be a referendum? I think that would be a fair way. It would delay the process until the 21st, and then President Trump then can do the...
I'm not sure how you could do a referendum. I mean, who would you include? Just people who actually originally came from there, or their children, their grandchildren? I mean, it's be a rather difficult thing to do. Mark Ferguson.
It's undoubtedly complicated. Look, the history of the Chagos Islands and Diego Garcia is a long-running issue. One, I think anyone who has sort of an interest in foreign policy and defence policy will be familiar with. But I think before this process, I think there was a sort of a sense of limbo about it, and there's certainly been a desire to provide far greater clarity. This is something that was begun under the last government. It's something that's been carried through under this government. Despite a change of government in this country, the process continued, the negotiations continued, and I would simply say I don't plan on endorsing a world in which Nigel Farage is leading on our international policy, but nor do I endorse a world where I am leading on our international policy. And I look forward to seeing what discussions the Foreign Secretary and others have with their new counterparts in America.
I mean, Nigel Farage is obviously quite close to Donald Trump and this incoming administration. Wouldn't it be sensible to use him a little bit as a bit of a conduit?
I think it would be a remarkable state of affairs for the leader of another political party to begin transacting the foreign policy of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Yeah. I think it would run contrary to the way that we do politics in this country in quite a fundamental way. And I dare suggest if the roles were reversed, the honourable member for Clacton would not be taking up a reverse offer. So I think, although I don't speak on behalf of the government here, I can't imagine anyone on the Labour benches would be taking Nigel up on that.
I think you're probably right, Sam.
think that's absolutely spot on.
I think it's the least controversial thing I've said.
Absolutely.
And I don't think I've been particularly controversial, but that
wholeheartedly concur with you on that one. I think it just felt like that the whole issue was very, very rushed, and it feels like there was an agenda and a reason that was rushed. And I don't think it resolved what it was supposed to resolve, in that the Chagosians do not seem to be en masse behind the decision. And I think that's a problem. So, what is the end game if the people you are supposedly trying to help are not in support of it? I think that's an issue. And I think it seemed to be almost an attempt to avoid having to deal with Trump on this. But as a consequence, it was rushed through and ill thought through.
Yeah, I mean, I think the referendum idea is just doomed to fail in a way, because, although obviously in principle the idea of saying, well, here's a controversy, let's let the people decide, it's definitely something that has some merit to it. All you would be doing is taking one controversy and replacing it then with the controversy over who gets to vote in the referendum. And so, it's not, in that sense, a magic democratic wand that one can wave to solve things. I also surprised that so many people seem so confident in predicting what Donald Trump's going to do. I mean, does his last tenure as president not give a clue that he very often says one thing and then does something else? So who knows, what in practice will happen come late January. But I think, I think certainly at this point, making any decisions based on a confident assertion that, well, because Donald Trump has said X in the past, he's bound to do Y in the future might be right, but, is a little bit foolish, perhaps.
OK, we'll take more of your questions in just a moment. And, of course, after 9, we will be talking about misogyny and inappropriate behaviour in the workplace. I mean, just as a subject that you talk about. I mean, not hooked to anything in particular, as you might imagine it.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:49 on LBC. We have Mark Pack, Jim Shannon, Sam Lister and Mark Ferguson with us answering your questions. James says, will any kind of reset be enough to save this ailing government? Mark Ferguson, it's ailing, according to James, after only 5 months. There is I said to Pat McFadden when I interviewed him yesterday, I said, it's a reset. He said, oh, no, it's not a reset. But it does come to something when after only 5 months, there has to be something which is akin to a reset.
Look, Ian, as you said at the top of the hour, I used to be a blogger and I used to have my fun, certainly with the Conservative Party. This is X. Every speech by the Prime Minister or a party leader is a reset. The reality is, I think what we're going to hear on Thursday is an update on where we're at with Labour's 5 missions, and I would accept that those 5 missions are not necessarily something that every member of the public knows about, but I think spelling out, really it's about spelling out that vision and that plan for what a Labour government is going to achieve.
Wasn't that what the election was for?
Well, and we had the election, and I'm very pleased with what the outcome of the election is.
But if you do a progress report, you do that after a year. You don't do it after 5 months.
No, but look, we're going to do this really boring, but I think slightly remarkable thing in British politics. Nothing we're going to announce on Thursday is going to be radically different, I don't believe, from our manifesto, but it's going to be about talking about what our clear priorities are and what we're going to deliver over the course of this term of this Parliament to show the British people that fundamentally government does work. Because I think one of the saddest things that I hear when I'm speaking to people in Gateshead is people think that it doesn't matter what government does. That bothers me even more than they're all the same, which bothers me quite a lot. But what bothers me even more than that is the idea that it doesn't matter what government does, it won't have an effect on their lives. Because the reality is, everything government does has an effect on somebody's lives. Because as much as people might believe,
to fuel allowance.
Well, decisions have had to be taken in order to restore the public finances, and I understand and appreciate that they are not always easy decisions. If they were easy decisions, I dare say they would have happened already. But what was going to be happening on Thursday, I hope, is that we're going to hear from the Prime Minister the clear pathway of delivery, because the only way I'm ever going to be able to convince people who think government won't make a difference is by saying to them, we said we'd do X, and we've done X. Here's
Sam.
Well, I think Mark let the cat out of the bag. It's going to be boring and there's going to be nothing new in it, so what's the point? But aside from that, and I won't test Mark, there's 5 missions. Can anyone remember them? There's 4 steps. I can't remember those. I think we're going to get some milestones. So in between the steps, milestones and missions, I think it's very confusing. I think if you're a member of the public sat at home, I don't know how you wade through those steps, missions, milestones to work out what on earth the government is about. And we know that from the election, the whole pitch was we're going to have the fastest growth in the G7. It's all going to be about growth. It's not going to be about tax rises. And then obviously we got the winter fuel cuts, we got tax rises, and apparently there will not be a commitment to being the fastest growing country in the G7.
No one has ever
Thursday.
said to me what I really chomp at the bit for is to be the fastest growing economy in the G7.
So why put it in there? Why put it in there if it wasn't important?
Well, I'll say this. People in Gateshead don't care whether growth in a quarter is 0.3% or 0.5%. What they care is how much is my shopping, how much is my gas bill, how much does petrol cost.
So why commit to it then?
Well, the reality is that you have given me far too much credit because you've implied I know what the Prime Minister. You implied I know what the Prime Minister is going to say on Thursday, and of course I don't. But if there's one thing I do know about this Prime Minister, is that he sets out a plan and he follows it incredibly diligently and he delivers on it. And I saw that in the way that he has completely changed my party and got it ready for government. And I have every confidence that's what we're going to see in government.
I think there's just a lack of narrative. I hate that phrase. I apologise for using it, but really the story coming out of the government has only been about bad things. It's been about pain. It's been about tax rises and winter fuel cuts, and it hasn't. There's been no optimism. There's been no story about how we're going to get better as a country, how things are going to improve, and then we get these confusing steps and missions. And so I think it's a very confusing message. I don't think there's any hope there. I think that's really lacking, and I think there's been a lot of pain, and I think people are quite fed up of that.
I think, but something like, for example, and we may well disagree on this, Sam, the Employment Rights Bill, which went through only a few months ago, that's going to happen. Now, it's not going to happen immediately, and this is the sad thing about politics, and it comes back to Ian's point about 5 months, is that people are desperate for change and they want to see it, but the reality is it can't happen. I am desperate for the pace of change to be quicker, and I am absolutely sure everyone in government is. I'm absolutely sure whether you voted Labour or not, you want that change to be quick.
Isn't that what Thursday is about? Did you see the Sun's headline yesterday? Sakir attacks the blob, by which they mean that he's doing this to try and get the civil service to maybe react a little bit quicker to the political decisions. And you talk to any government minister, whether it's in this government or the last government, it's sometimes very difficult to get the machine of government to act as quickly as politicians want it to act.
Well, I think the way you go about things is you set yourself a goal and you resolutely focus yourself on it. That's what mission-led government is about. And, Sam said what she said about the 5 missions. And look, the reality is, over the course of the next 5 years, we're going to make sure we deliver on them, because then people will know what they are and they will know how it's affected their lives.
Now, look at the record, Mark. With respect, look at the record. Winter Fuel Alliance, who have they hurt? The vulnerable, the disabled, and those who can't afford. I believe that was wrong. That wasn't a Labour thing to do. I said, to me, the Labour Party was the Labour Party, the party of conscience. They certainly didn't show it in that case. They pursued the national insurance contributions. Where does that end up? Tell you where that ends up. You pass it on to the businesses, you pass it on to the GPs, it affects the health service, you pass it on to the business and the shops. What do? They add it onto the price. So who pays for it? The ordinary man and woman in the street. Again, who do you hurt? Labour shouldn't do it. They hurt the ordinary person. The farm inheritance tax. What a disaster, In Northern Ireland, it will affect almost 70% of all the farms. Northern Ireland is family farms. I live in a family farm. All my neighbours will be impacted by it, every one of them. I'm a member of the Ulster Farmers Union. They have told me quite clearly that they see the problems ensnared in this. We're having a meeting next week with Steve Reid this time. Well, this day next week we'll have a meeting with Steve Reid. I'm taking the Ulster Farmers Union over to meet him.
Well, would that be the same Steve Reid that said just before the election, we will not be raising inheritance tax on family farms?
I have to say, Ian, that's the man.
I thought it might be.
Yeah. And there you have.
To be fair to him, he was only told about it the night before the budget, so he didn't, as Agriculture Secretary, he had no input into it at all.
Some of the good things that they do, and you can't ignore the good things, by the way. The good things are that West Streeting has been incredibly positive and focused upon the National Health Service. They get 22 billion for the National Health Service.
25.6.
Well, 25.6. The fact is,
those
he's got
3.6 are important.
They're all important. But the thing is, he did it. And tonight in the chamber tonight, it's a Grenfell inquiry. Government to be fair to Angela, tonight she spoke with a voice, the same voice as we all had. What a pleasure. There's some of the positives. There are positives, but I tell you what, there's three things that I see that are going to affect us all. It's going to affect the economy. Will it grow the economy, the national insurance contributions? No, it won't. Will the national farm, the family inheritance tax, will it help the farmers where they are? Well, I don't see that either. And I'm really conscious of the winter fuel allowance. And they said it was saved 1.5 billion. But what they didn't say, of course, was that if everybody got their attendance allowance, it would cost actually 2.5 billion. So, I mean, wow,
okay,
where's the
Mark here on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem the government faces is they say we've got a plan and we're sticking to it. But as Sam was saying, they keep on changing quite what the plan is. You know, we had the missions, we've had the steps, we've had the priorities. And actually, you can either say you've got a plan and you're sticking with it, or you can say, you know what, as events change, as we get to grips with the job, we're evolving our plan. The problem is Labour seem to be trying to say both at the same time. And, it's only a couple of weeks ago that we had the press stories about how there were just the two priorities, only the two priorities now the government was going to zoom in on. And it seems like, I may be proved wrong about this, but Keir Starmer isn't going to get up and give his speech later this week and say, yeah, it's just the two priorities. It will be a change yet again. And I think that he's just caught between saying, I'm not changing, but changing. And that satisfies nobody.
Right, let's finish with our fun question. It's from Chrissy in Oxford.
You mean that wasn't the fun question?
For many people, it's the 1st of December. For some, it was straight after Halloween. For others, it might even be Christmas Eve. So, panel, when did or when will the Christmas decorations go up? Now, Mark, you've already revealed that you have.
Off air, I've revealed that I used to be a just before Christmas panic, buy so much as a branch and wrap it in tinsel. But now I thought I'd please my little boy this year by getting an early Christmas tree. But his main problem is that he doesn't agree with where I've put it. So I slightly regret my decision.
Aspirant politician there. Jim?
Yeah. Well, I'm very fortunate this year. I've got the two grandchildren. My youngest son and his wife, Luke and Rachel, and the two children, Freya and Ezra. They're that lovely age, 4 and 2. My goodness, Christmas this year in our house will be incredible. The Christmas tree went up yesterday, by the way. The decorations will go up next week. I love it. Is Santa Claus still coming? Well, I believe he is.
Yeah. Bless. Sam?
My Christmas decorations just go up whenever I've got chance, so it will be the weekend coming. But I'll just let you in on a very quick secret. The Daily Express team in Parliament, the tradition is we sneak in a real Christmas tree that spends the rest of the year buried in one of the team's gardens.
Well, I think we should have a Christmas tree in the studio. Sort of, it look really nice over there.
The beautiful one. With
LBC doesn't do Christmas. Never has done. You go walk past the Smooth studio, and they've got virtually every Christmas decoration known to Christendom, and we have nothing.
Very Scroogey.
Christmas Eve, got to be Christmas Eve. That's when the Christmas decorations go up. I think that comes from the German side of my family, so I spend most of December just in a grouch, sort of looking at all these people who are putting up tinsel far too early.
Quite agree. Right, thank you all very much indeed. On tomorrow's panel, Labour's Education Minister Catherine McKinnell, the Conservative backbencher Sir John Hayes, the Sunday Telegraph columnist Janet Daly, and LBC's very own Aggie Chambray.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 9 on LBC. It's Iain Dale here with you until 10, if my voice holds out. Now, Greg Wallace. Not somebody that I know an awful lot about. I've never seen the programme that he presents with John Torode. I can't stand cooking programmes generally. But he's always, whenever I've seen him on other programmes, I've often thought to myself, I'm not sure you're somebody I like very much. Now, you might think, well, how can you make judgments over somebody that you've never met? Well, we all do, don't we, frankly? And he has clearly been accused of making not just boorish comments, but he's been accused of sexual harassment and all sorts of things, which the BBC had been warned about. We know that because Asma Mia has told us that she emailed all sorts of different people back in 2017 to warn them of his behaviour. We're now 7 years on. He still co-presents one of the BBC's most viewed shows. In fact, the show that they told us this morning they weren't going to show, they are showing tonight, featuring him, which I think is a bit of a slap in the face to all of those 13 women who have come forward. And if there are 13 that have come forward, I suspect that there are others who might do in the future. That's how these things go. So one of my questions, I suppose, in all of this is why on earth the BBC didn't take any of the warnings seriously. My second question, which is possibly a more important one, is how widespread are the kinds of behaviour that Greg Wallace has been accused of? Is it taken seriously enough by employers when it does occur? And is the BBC right to insist it will show episodes of MasterChef featuring Greg Wallace in the weeks leading up to Christmas? So quite a lot to get our teeth into there. 0345 6060 973. Andy says, I know you don't know better because of your class. Thanks very much, Andy. Guess what? Working class people can be quite vulgar. I think the media elite need to stop pretending they're children. You are adults, and this is what the real world looks like. Deal with it. There speaks the voice of a misogynist man. I say that because, look, I like sort of banter. I like repartee. But I don't want to be involved in repartee that causes people gross offence. I don't want to involve myself in repartee that makes people feel uncomfortable. I have a pretty bawdy sense of humour. You might have gathered that over the years. Certainly if you listen to For the Many podcast, you would. But I am conscious in the workplace, I think, of where the limits are. And if I transgress those limits, I appreciate someone telling me that I've done so. And sometimes there are things that people say, whether they're of my class, Andy, or indeed any other class, or indeed any other age group, that you think, maybe that was a little bit near the knuckle. And I don't want to work in a place where everybody has to watch what they say all the time. But neither do I want anybody to come into the workplace and fear being alongside somebody who they think might either harass them or bully them or do anything that they wouldn't like. That's not being woke. That's just being a normal human being, I would have thought. But there are too many workplaces where this sort of thing does go on. And I think it is quite a difficult thing for employers to tackle and to stamp out. What's been your experience? 0345 6060 973. Beverly Sunderland joins me, a partner of Crossland Employment Solicitors. Beverly, very good evening to you. One of the things that I think older people do have to take increasing notice of is the fact that younger people's value sets are different to theirs. And some of the things that I might have been able to joke about 10 or 20 years ago, I wouldn't do in the workplace now. And that's because I exercise some self-control. But if you are in an environment where the sort of bawdy humour goes on all of the time, and you haven't got the insight to see that one or two people might be find that rather uncomfortable, it can lead to very difficult situations, can't it?
It absolutely can. And I think that's probably one of the primary reasons why the law was changed as of the 26th of October, which says that actually employers now have a positive duty to stop sexual harassment in the workplace. Sexual harassment either by other employees or by third parties. And if they don't pay attention to that, then they'll get whacked for extra compensation as and when an employee wins a claim. And also they might have the Equality and Human Rights Act Commission crawling all over them as a result. So I'm afraid the good old days of banter, which is a word, frankly, I would eliminate from the dictionary if I was Prime Minister. All of
Should
those...
Should we just say bants?
Yes. Just shorten it a little bit. But honestly, if I had £1 for every time I hear an employee say, "Oh, it was just a bit of banter," and you started this, Ian, you said this is nothing to do with your sense of humour. It's because you're a human being and you don't want to say something that's going to offend people. And I don't think that that's got anything to do with age. I think it's, I'm the same age as Greg Wallace, and I wouldn't dream of saying some of the things that he said.
No, And I'd like to think I wouldn't either. But I can think of situations where, if you sit at a desk with the same 3 or 4 people each day, as I do, for example, you develop relationships with them and you kind of work out where the boundaries are. And you don't sort of deliberately seek to transgress those boundaries, but there might be occasions when somebody says something where one of the others thinks, not quite so sure about that. And if you have good relationships with them, they will say to you, yeah, I don't think you should have said that. And then you store that away and you learn for the next time. And I'm not going to pretend that I haven't been in that situation.
No, I completely agree, but I think you've got a different setup here. And I mean, let's not prejudge anything. That the BBC, Banijay, who is a production company, they're all doing their own investigations. And innocent until proven guilty, I think, still is established in UK law. But imagine if you are in a situation where you are a contestant or you are a junior member of the production staff hoping for a career in the last thing you're going to do is make a complaint if you think that somebody has behaved inappropriately. And it's that balance of power, isn't it? Because of that, if you are a big presenter, then you particularly have to be careful what you say and what you do because of that imbalance, and I think that is often the problem in these cases.
He obviously compounded his offences this morning when he talked about middle class women and all of that, which offended a huge amount of people. And as soon as I saw Kirsty Allsop get involved, I thought, mate, you're in real trouble now. And that almost seems to be as bad as the other things that he's accused of doing. But if somebody's listening to this now who's been at work today and thought, well, isn't this a storm in a teacup? Because I hear banter, sorry to use that word again, banter like this every day in my workplace, and I've got used to it. It doesn't particularly offend me. But what should they do about it if it does offend them?
If it offends them, then they need to go and speak to the appropriate person in the workplace. That'll usually be HR, and have a quiet word and say, look, I don't want to make a big thing of this, but the kind of behaviours in the workplace are not appropriate. They're starting to offend me. We've got junior people, we've got new people, we don't know anything about them. Perhaps it's time for some training. Particularly with the new offences coming in, as I said, on the 26th of October, employers should be proactively doing this to make everybody aware that it's completely inappropriate. But that is the starting point. If they don't have HR, then go to the next responsible person, perhaps their manager, unless, of course, their manager's joining in which case it's a slightly bigger problem. But they need to speak up confidentially and say this is not appropriate.
Do you think it's also the responsibility of male co-workers to address this? Sadiq Khan ran a campaign last year, I think it was, and it was headlined Mate. And it was when, say, for example, one of my co-workers said something that I thought was a bit on the borderline or even over it, I would just go, mate, come on, and tackle it that way rather than escalate it up a formal ladder. Is that something that... And I suppose also, let's not pretend that women aren't capable of indulging in this kind of behaviour as well. I mean, I know several cases where there have been women who have sexually harassed men in the workplace. I mean, admittedly, it would probably be a very small percentage of cases. I'm not exaggerating, but it does and can happen. Do you think it is for co-workers to take on some of the responsibility here?
Absolutely. And that's where the dynamics of power come in, because if it is somebody in your senior position who is saying this, then the more junior co-workers, they've got one eye on their career. They're not going to want to say anything about the boss. But I think everybody needs to step up and, to use the colloquial words, call it out and say that was not appropriate. And I think only at that stage will they start to perhaps get the message. But now, if businesses are not seen to be stamping all over this at an early stage, they're going to find themselves in so much trouble. Not least, as I said, the Equality and Human Rights Commission can come in and find out what they've been doing and tell them where they need to do things more correctly. And that's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? It'd be embarrassing if they decided to sort of...
I suspect some of the winners in this are going to be people like you, Beverly, lawyers, who are going to have an increasing number of cases coming across their desks.
Yes, but I have to say it gives me no pleasure. I would much rather be involved in the training and the education and the to stop it from happening. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm sure employment lawyers are not going to be sort of out of business anytime soon. But it's unfortunate. We would rather that the workplaces were actually free from this kind of nonsense. I mean, it's been going on long enough. Just generally, I'm not talking about Greg Wallace, but it has been going on long enough, and it needs to stop. People need to start being a bit more respectful.
Beverly, thank you for joining us. That's Beverly Sunderland, partner of Crossland Employment Solicitors. I'm looking forward to your calls on this because it's the kind of subject we don't talk about an awful lot on the radio, about sexual harassment in the workplace. We tend to talk more about bullying. Now, the two have a bit of a crossover, I suspect. But have you experienced this kind of behaviour in your workplace? How widespread are the kinds of behaviour that Greg Wallace has been accused of? Is it taken seriously enough by employers when it does occur? 0345 6060 973. And why do you think it is that the BBC just didn't act on the warnings that they had from the likes of sort of well-known presenters like Asma Mir? She's been very open that she emailed various BBC bosses when she encountered him 7 years ago, and she did it on the basis that they couldn't then say that they weren't warned. 0345 6060 973.
Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
And the homophobic tweets or texts have already started. This is from Mark Graham, who starts his text off by saying, Mrs. Dale. Thank you very much for that. Who the hell are you to judge normal working class men? I wasn't aware I had, but if you mean that I judge men who indulge in sexist, misogynist behaviour, whether they're working class, middle class or upper class, I probably am going to judge them, yes. Then he continues, as an, quotes, overtly gay man. Am I? Really? Okay. You haven't a clue how normal working class men and women converse in the work environment. I think I do. I've worked in many different environments. I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say that I've worked in many environments where working class men are present, but believe me, I have. Get a life and stop judging normal people. Have some respect, you moron. I think I'll leave my listeners to judge who's the moron in this conversation, Mark, and got your phone number as well. Thanks for that. Now, let's take some more texts here. This is Anastasia, who says, I don't like being called mate or love. I saw a documentary about a man being abused by his ex-wife. It was a horrendous watch, and I have a big stomach. Have a big stomach, thick skin. Okay, fine. Well, that's nice to know, Anastasia. And another one here, Oliver, Ian. A few jokes. What actually has he done, Greg Wallace? Yes, if he said something to a junior member of the production staff, that's not on. But to balance things out, haven't we become such an overtly sensitive, wrapped up in cotton wool society? I find that argument difficult because in some ways we have. But I think when you look at what the accusations are against Greg Wallace, and I'll detail them if you want me to in a moment, I mean, it's pretty seedy kind of behaviour where he would walk into a female... excuse me, let me take a sip of water. He would walk into a female guest dressing room, I gather, half naked, with his top off. Would any normal person do that with someone that they didn't know? I don't think they would they? I mean, it's just not the kind of behaviour you would expect. Now, I mean, on the scale of sexual harassment, that's you can say, well, if it's 1 to 10, that's on the low side. But it still makes a woman feel uncomfortable. And that surely is what any man would want to stop doing. I mean, it really is as simple as that, isn't it? Because if it gets more complicated than that, I don't know. I don't know how you can sort of react to things or react in a normal way to things that you experience. They make you feel uncomfortable, but then you probably feel a bit guilty that you feel that uncomfortable. You think, well, should that make me feel uncomfortable? Well, if it does make you feel uncomfortable, there should be a consequence for that. And it's the power dynamic thing as well, isn't it? Because if you are in a senior position in a workplace, and if you are a TV personality, dare I say, if you are a presenter on a radio station, I think you do have an added responsibility to make sure that people around you do not feel uncomfortable, that you do not either say or do things that make them feel that they would rather be anywhere else but there. I mean, I just think that's normal behaviour. It's got nothing to do with being woke. You look at some of the examples that are depicted in TV dramas of things that people say in workplaces, and obviously I realise that that's all fiction. But in the end, we should all, whatever our background, whatever our education, whatever our class, if we really have to go there, we should look at how we act personally, how we interact with other people, and think to ourselves, have I gone over the top? And look, I'll be completely honest, I have told jokes in the workplace that probably, in retrospect, in 2024, I wouldn't now tell. Be completely honest with you. I've never told a joke to try and deliberately make someone feel uncomfortable, but looking back, there are probably things that I've said that I regret now, that I don't think any of them are on the Greg Wallace scale of things. I certainly hope they aren't. 0345 6060 973. Now, the Prime Minister has just started a speech on foreign affairs, doubt whether he's mentioning Greg Wallace, at the Lord Mayor's banquet in the City of London. Let's dip into that for a moment.
Problems have become local. Geopolitics is on our doorstep, shaping our lives in ways that nobody asked for. Conflicts overseas undermine our security, stir up violence and extremism on our streets, and drive up the cost of living. Meanwhile, climate change hits economic growth, leaves us exposed to catastrophic flooding, and both of these forces drive unsustainable levels of migration. It all manifests in a feeling amongst very many people that the system isn't working for them, that it's time to take back control of our lives, our borders, our livelihoods. And I hear that. People want action, and they want change. So we will not dismiss those concerns. We will answer them. And we will do so by acting at home, absolutely, but also by using our strength abroad. Because in this new era, we need to do things differently. There was a sense in the years of the Great Moderation that while there would always be conflicts, democratic values were in the ascendancy, and the disruptive nature of foreign policy, the real nature of foreign policy, could be contained, or at least managed. Well, from that twilight of naivety, we have emerged now into the harsh light of the day, determined to fight harder on the world stage for our national interests, and ready to dig deeper to defend them. I think of the Attlee government of 1945. Their ambition for the people of this country was unmatched. They were determined to win the peace, to create the National Health Service, build homes, national parks, a country fit for heroes. And in doing so, they knew they also needed to look out to the world. That's why they created NATO, the greatest alliance in history, tempered by the times that they had lived through. They were hard-headed and patriotic, and they saw that maintaining our strength abroad gave us the foundation to succeed at home. And that is as true today as it was then. So I want to be clear at the outset, against the backdrop of these dangerous times, the idea that we must choose between our allies, that somehow we're with either America or Europe, is plain wrong. I reject it utterly. Attlee did not choose between allies. Churchill did not choose. The national interest demands that we work with both. Our relationship with the United States has been the cornerstone of our security and our prosperity for over a century. And we will never turn away from that. We call it the special relationship for a reason. It's written not in some dry, dusty treaty, but in the ink of shared sacrifice. In the memorials, in villages, in towns, in cities, up and down the country. In Normandy, Flanders, and around the world. Right here in the Guildhall are etched the names of 112 killed in the First World War and 55 in the Second. And if you haven't had the chance, they're just near the entrance of the hall. Take the opportunity before you leave to just go and glance at those names there, inscribed on the memorial on the wall. They were fighting alongside the US, like we still do today, for the same causes. And so this is not about sentimentality. It's about hard-headed realism. Time and again, the best hope for the world and the surest way to serve our mutual national interest has come from our two nations working together.
That's the Prime Minister Keir Starmer speaking at in the City of London at the Mansion House. It's the Lord Mayor's banquet. Not a scintillating speaker, is he? It has to be said. Right, we are going to take your calls on Greg Wallace and sexual harassment, and does that happen in your workplace in just a moment. And we'll also get the latest state of play from Dublin and the Irish election results.
This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
9:34 on LBC. We're talking about Greg Wallace and the things that he's accused of. We're trying to concentrate on whether this sort of thing happens in your workplace. Lots and lots of people are texting in. Not as many people phoning in. We'll go to Stephen Romford in a moment. But first, Terry says, a delicate issue, Ian, but one definitely requiring discussion. The BBC is not the only entertainment place that sexist behaviour and oppression takes place. In 28 years in live music and theatre, I've witnessed much innuendo and creepy behaviour, mostly from men towards women. I've never tolerated this. I've always called it out and have removed people from my various band lineups. We must respect each other's safety and mental health above all else. Look, I don't really disagree with any of that. I mean, if you're saying that all innuendo and double entendres should be banned from the workplace, I think that would be a very, very sad place to end up. Double entendres and innuendo mostly are completely harmless, and we surely have to, as individuals, take responsibility for judging when harmlessness goes into something more creepy. I guess that's what you're saying, Terry, to be fair. Let's go to Steve in Romford. Steve, you're a first-time caller. Welcome. What would you like to tell us?
Hi, Ian. Great show. I think these people should work behind the bar in a pub. My local just down the road, I'm visually impaired and I have a guide dog. I get it taken out of me all the time. I don't care. Like, look where you're going. Dog for the blind drunk. And the girls who work behind the bar, some of them are 18, in their 20s, in their 30s, and all that. They get the stick all the time from every customer, and they give it back. So what? What is the problem? Just give it back. What is? I can't see what the big issue is.
All right, well, let me try and explain it. I think the issue is that if you are, say, a junior member of the production staff or of the production company that produces MasterChef, and the star celebrity comes into your dressing room or the office that you're working in naked from the waist up, I mean, I would find that creepy as a sort of middle-aged male. I don't know what an 18-year-old junior member of a production staff would find it, but I suspect they would be quite intimidated by it.
Well, I would tell them to go away impolitely.
Well, then you're part of the problem, Steve.
Well, no. If you don't like it, go away. I don't want you to do this to me. So just
No, but do you not get the power dynamic there, where you've got the star of the show effectively maybe he didn't realise he was doing it, but effectively intimidating a junior young woman. Now, that junior young woman hasn't got the life experience that you have. She hasn't maybe got the ability to say directly to his face, "Get out of here, you creepy git."
Yeah, then the hierarchy or the governor she should go to and say, "Look, I don't like this. Can you do something about it?"
Exactly, and that's all I'm.
Sorry,
but what I'm saying, Steve, is that he or anyone in his position ought to be able to think. I mean, he's not a stupid man. He wouldn't be holding the position he is if he was stupid. He must surely realise the impact that his behaviour can have on junior members of staff, on maybe guests on MasterChef who just sort of look at him as the celebrity and therefore are a bit in awe of him. And he's exploiting that. That's the problem.
Yeah, I can sort of see both sides, but if you like for see the girls working in the pub, the banter and the stick that they get, it doesn't bother them. They just carry on and give it back.
Well, maybe it does, but they don't say anything.
No, they don't. That's just how it is. Otherwise, they wouldn't work there. And it's a brilliant communication between everybody. It's a great atmosphere.
Well, I completely get you. I've worked in a pub. I really enjoyed it, and I'm going to use that word that our guest didn't like, banter. Banter is part of a pub atmosphere. You're absolutely right. Yeah. But the customers are not employing the bar staff. The publican is employing the bar staff. And if the bar staff are uncomfortable, presumably they then complain to the publican, who then does something about it. But again, that creates an atmosphere in itself, doesn't it?
Yeah. But there is no atmosphere. It's just that's how it is. And it's a great atmosphere. It's a great banter. There's no problem. There's no. That's just. I mean, as I said to you earlier, I get it all the time. I've got a guide dog, and if you say, "Oh, dog for the blind drunk," or "Look where you're going," I just take it as like it's a sense of humour. You don't get offended by it.
No, and we haven't got a law that says people aren't legally allowed to be offended. I mean, I presenting this programme, it's not in my interest to gratuitously offend people because they'll switch off and never listen again, and it'll affect my listening figures. But that doesn't mean to say that if somebody comes on and says something that's completely obnoxious or completely stupid, I'm not going to tell them so, because on occasion I will. But you know where the limits are. You know when you should say something and you know when you shouldn't. That's all I'm saying, Steve. Thank you very much. Caroline in Radlett says, to the person that made the comment regarding the working class people, it's mainly upper class people. Actually, just start with Prince. So don't be putting the working class down. that was a message to the person who texted in, Andy, I think it was, rather than me. At least I hope it was. Let's go to Paul, who's a new caller in Basingstoke. Hello, Paul.
Evening, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I was explaining to your call taker that I train people around this topic. In fact, I've got 2 days training coming up tomorrow and the day after on the new legislation. And I used to be an ACAS director, so I've been around this subject for a very long time. And I think a lot of the advice that particularly the employment lawyer gave earlier on was great. There was one thing that I think is really important for people to understand, which is that, and it goes to that point you were talking about banter as well, that this isn't an absolute ban on humour in the workplace. But what's really important is when that humour goes too far, people actually not only just go off to HR or talk to managers, but they actually make very clear to the person who's using the inappropriate words, who's behaving in an inappropriate way, that behaviour is unwanted. And this is quite important because the legislation refers to harassment as unwanted behaviour. And the tribunals, the courts, will take into account that if somebody's laughing along, if somebody's joining in, or if somebody says nothing, then it might not be taken as unwanted. So there's a lot of nuance to these cases. Clearly, some of them go too far, stripping off in the workplace. That sort of it's unwanted touching is clearly an absolute horrible thing to happen and an absolute no-no. But the general joking around, the light-hearted conversation that gets people through the day, that's all more nuanced. And if it goes too far, then people need to be really clear and say it's gone too far.
I don't disagree with any of that. I'm just trying to sort of think of situations where somebody wouldn't make a complaint because they would fear that it would just ruin the whole work environment if they did. And therefore they kind of suffer in silence. And I suspect there's a lot of that goes on.
I think there's some of it that goes on. I think that's absolutely true. And some of the individual cases that I've dealt with have been pretty horrible. Comments made by company owners, powerful bosses, to young and potentially vulnerable people. Absolutely. But you asked earlier on in the programme how common this is. And I think I'm up to about 21 years now of dealing with this. It's not... A lot of that kind of situation is few and far between. Among the many thousands of people that I trained on a day-to-day basis, when I talk about, I often ask that question: who wants to work in a workplace where there is no humour, no banter? And it's a very rare thing for somebody to say, yeah, I'd like that. A few people do. You're absolutely true. And I heard your employment lawyer earlier on say just that. But for the vast majority of people, this is how they get through the working day. And it's not a class issue. It's just normal life. I think the people who, where it becomes a problem is two situations. One is when you have vulnerable people, and the other is where people have joined in quite willingly for sometimes years, and then something's happened to them at work or something's happened in their personal lives, and then suddenly it becomes a problem. And this is why the training's so important, because I think actually, training people, as was suggested earlier, is one of those things that opens up the opportunity for people to say enough's enough, and we can have that conversation which sets the level without ending up with massive investigations and disciplinaries. And so I think that's a good place to be, acknowledging there'll always be those most serious cases which need dealing with more robustly.
Paul, thank you very much. That's Paul from Basingstoke. John says, I worked in a large public company, and some years ago there was a young 22-year-old South African woman who was leaving the company. They had a presentation for her in the office where she was given presents. One of the presents was from a director, and it contained what is best described as an adult toy. It was extremely awkward and embarrassing, and I couldn't believe it then, and I still can't believe it now. The director was more than twice her age, which added another sinister dynamic to it. Nothing was ever done about this, and I believe this is because he was a director. So what do you do in that situation? I mean, it's clearly an incredibly crass thing to do. I mean, you don't say how she reacted to it. But when someone senior in the company does that, what do you do about it? 0345 6060 973.
Iain Dale on LBC.
Now, this is an interesting one. This is Bob on a text who says, can I please help your caller named Steve? He explained the banter in his pub either to the female or male bar staff. But if a stranger came into his local and made innuendos to the bar staff, I'm sure the regulars would be the first to defend the staff and politely inform him or her they were out of order. I think that's probably what would happen. You'd hope it would happen, Bob, wouldn't you? Come back to your calls in a moment. But first, as you know, because we've been covering it for the last week, the people of the Republic of Ireland went to the polls on Friday. I spent half the weekend watching the results come in on RTE and News Talk FM, and also listening to the Irish Times Election Daily podcast, which has featured, not in every episode, but most episodes, Pat Leahy, who's political editor of the Irish Times. Pat, very good evening to you. Now, it's very sad for me that it's all coming to an end. Have we got the final results now?
Almost, but not quite. We're still waiting on the last 2 seats in the last of the 43 constituencies to be filled. We expect that to be done, please God, before midnight and final paper deadlines. But we know really what 99% of the outcome is. It's a very good result for Fianna Fáil. It will return to government with Fine Gael. It's old enemy. You and I have talked about it before, Ian. It's once upon a time its old deadly enemy, and now it's collaborator in government. So the two old parties look like they're on their way back to government. The centre in Irish politics has held, unlike lots of other places that saw elections this year.
But in raw numbers, have they got enough between them to form a government without bringing in some of the minor parties?
Almost, but not quite. So a majority in the new Dáil, because the numbers have been increased due to population increase. The bare majority is at 88. They will be at about, depending on how those last 2 seats go, they will be at about 85 or maybe 86. So they're a little bit short of majority. Those of your listeners, and I know you do, Ian, who follow Irish politics, will know that in the last government, they had the Green Party in with them. But the Greens got decimated in this election. They dropped from 12 seats to just 1 seat, so they're not in the picture. I think what is the likely outcome in formation of government terms is that they will be supported by a couple of independent TDs. There's going to be about 25 or so independents or small party TDs, and from their ranks, my guess is that a few people will support the government, either from the inside of that government or more likely from the outside of it, to give it a majority. So you will have Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governing practically alone.
So there's no prospect, you think, of the Labour Party or the Social Democrats or the Soc Dems, as you call them. There's no prospect of them going into government, because they will have seen what happens to a left-wing party going into government. And I heard, I don't know whether it was you or one of your colleagues on the podcast today, describe the minor party in a coalition as the mud guard. And so they won't want to have what's happened to the Greens happen to them.
Yeah, precisely right. It's an Irish political term for a smaller party that goes in with a larger party, a combination of larger parties, and ends up getting covered in mud. That has happened to parties on the left. It's happened to the Progressive Democrats, a party on the right, which went out of existence about 20 years ago after serving in coalition. I mean, I think if you talk to people from the Green Party, they would be very disappointed about losing their seats, but they say that is a price they are prepared to pay for getting their policies into operation. And we have pretty strict I suppose you would call them net zero laws, which will bind this current government to reduce carbon emissions just as it banned the last government. When it comes to the Labour Party or the Social Democrats, I think the Social Democrats, both of those will end up with 11 seats, I think. My guess is that the Social Democrats will not be interested. There is a faction in the Labour Party that will be interested, but I think they would be looking over their shoulders at their centre-left competitors in the Social Democrats were they to go into government. You know, it will take probably about 2 months to put together a government, I think. The end of the weekend, I thought that there was a strong chance that Labour would make it, but actually the closer that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael get to that magic 88-seat majority benchmark, the less leverage a third party in government would have, because they would always know, even if they took the ultimate sanction and walked out of that government, that it might survive, and that would necessarily diminish their leverage. So a long way to go in government formation, but my guess is that it will be Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and independents.
Now, you might think this is a very naive question, and it probably is, but I do know the history of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and it all goes back to the Irish Civil War. But given that both of these parties actually seem to agree on policy mostly, I mean, there are some differences, but I mean, nothing like we would have in the differences between the major parties in this country, why don't they just merge?
I mean, I would say a couple of things to that, Iain, and it's not a naive question by any stretch of the imagination. It's an argument that you hear in Irish politics regularly. And the first thing I would say is that why would they? Things are going quite well for them as it is. Now, of course, they don't as they did up to the 1980s and indeed into the 1990s. They don't command 70 or 80% of all votes between them. But those days are gone. Irish politics, like the politics of many European countries and may even be underway in the UK, Iain, has fractured, and that process accelerated really in the wake of the financial crisis and the recession that followed it. So the first thing that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael would say is, you know, we used to alternate in power, and now we've come together to have power more or less all the time. So why would we change this arrangement? The other thing, I suppose, is a more sort of nuanced argument. And while it is true that there is very, very little policy difference between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and that has been the way for a long time. There used to be significant differences on the north. There no longer is. But there are sort of cultural and historic differences between the party. And while they don't matter to people outside the parties, they do matter to the people in those parties who believe themselves to be different to one another. And when you're talking about a party, and I know you're an historian of the Conservative Party, you know, the party's self-perception matters to it. And if there was to be a merger, it would have to be agreed not by outside pundits, but it would have to be agreed by the membership of those parties themselves and their membership, their activists. The differences are important to them. So I kind of view it as almost a red herring of an argument. I don't think it is going to happen within my lifetime. And yet they are, to all intents and purposes, the same political force. And I think they have accepted that now.
Pat, thank you very much for joining us again, and thanks for all of your interviews over the past few weeks about the Irish election. That's Pat Leahy, political editor of the Irish Times. Now, Alan is in Poole in Dorset. Alan, I'm afraid we haven't got a lot of time. Far away.
I can hear that. No, I just think it's just down to bad management, absolutely for sure, right from the top. Just as Johnson and Partygate, it was bad management. A good manager should know exactly what's going on. He should be going in the canteen, talking to people. He should know exactly what's going on, and he should be putting it right. He does that by two ways, by example and knowing what's going on. And he should know what's going on. Just as Johnson should have known what's going on in Downing Street, and he should have been on it like a ton of bricks. But the man hasn't got the character to do it. Just like maybe the top of the BBC hasn't got the names to do it either.
Alan, perfectly timed. Thank you very much indeed. And thanks for all of your calls and messages this evening. I'm back tomorrow from 7. And as tomorrow is the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, we'll be focusing on life as a disabled person in the final hour of tomorrow's programme. I'll have a disability campaigner with me in the studio and he'll be taking your calls. If you missed any of this evening's show, you can listen back, as you know, on Catch Up on Global Player. And you can pause and rewind live radio as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including the whole show podcast for this show, which will be available for you shortly. 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 Available for you shortly.